was a rough transition. Sorry about that. It's okay. We're here. We're good. We're going to start off with a little song I've been working on. It's got, it's probably 80% complete at this point, is what I would say. It started out, I called it Bang Bang, but that's not what it's going to be finally called. But I'll let you listen to that while I make sure things are going okay. Shoot me a message in the chat if you're here. Let me know if it's working, if you hear me, if you hear things. And we'll get started. I do this to let people come in. All two of you.
Of the dragon, take us back to innocence to reawake. He will raise us from this pit of the dragon, bring us back to home. In the furnace, his face shining as the sun in its strength. His voice, the sound of many rushing waters, saying, I am that I am. God Almighty is his name. Come and save us. Slaves of the dragon, take us back to innocence to reawake. He will raise us from this pit of the dragon, bring us back to home. Down and reaching the floor. He's down and reaching the floor. A girdle of gold around his chest like white as the wool. His head and hair are white as the wool. His eyes were flame as a fire. His head and hair are white as the wool. His eyes were flame as a fire. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His feet were glowing like brass in the furnace. His face shining as the sun in its strength. His voice, the sound of sun in its strength. His voice, the sound of many rushing waters saying, I am that I am. He's gone and reaching the floor. God Almighty is his name. beginning. Born of the black where the echoes collapse. Boundless the void until the spark made a map. Cracked like a whip, the verb crafted the chaos. Twisting the worlds pinned together on the cross.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, there I go again. My mic was once again off. I did this the first time I did a research stream where I spoke for like the first 8 minutes and then realized I had done that. So I apologize. I was just kind of going over what I was doing in that last track and the lyrics and things like that, and why I like it, why it's important to me, and how I approach music like this, where it's kind of a piecemeal thing, where I come in and give as much energy as I have in the moment. So I'll just repeat some of the things I said because I was muted, but I have a lot of songs I'm working on that are like partially complete and things like this. This song in particular is one that I refer to as a barding song. Like it's a bard, like a bard in classical, Renaissance, medieval times, or even further back. They're the guy that shows up at the tavern and entertains and, plays the lute or the fiddle or whatever and sings you songs. But they're not just entertaining songs, like they're usually stories, intelligence, it's rumors. They're the great escapades of great warriors or soldiers or kings or the movements of people in power. So anyway, there's a lot to what a bard does. So this one's kind of like more of an esoteric telling, a storytelling. So it's going to be long. This one's going to be about the creation and my cosmological kind of take on each day. Just a little bit of language to let you know it's me kind of thing. And so I've got maybe 3 or 4 of the days finished lyric-wise. It's going to be an epic song. It's going to be like 6 minutes long maybe with some movements in between or some stuff. I don't know. I'm still working on it, but I'm excited to share it with you. So we'll do one more song before I get into research and things like that. I'm going to be here several hours, so I'm sorry for the mic mix-up in the beginning, but we'll listen to this again.
In the beginning. Born of the black where the echoes collapse. Boundless the void until the spark made a map. Cracked like a whip, the verb crafted the chaos. Twisting the worlds pinned together on the cross. Let there be light.
I love that.
Yeah. Formed in the spirit realm, patterned in the council. Alpha and the Omega made the announcement. Light in a wave on a string in the face. Cymatics with the matter, come and gather and obey. And we call it day and night. There was evening, there was morning. Day 2 up the voltage on the waters.
So again, each little stanza or verse is going to be like the days of creation. So that first one starts open. I love it. Let there be light, because the first little the lyric that I have here is kind of introducing the creation, essentially, with a lot of esoteric symbolism, like symbolic language.
Born of the black where the echoes collapse. Boundless.
Born in the black where the echoes collapse.
Born of the black where the echoes collapse.
This is like
Boundless the void until
unorganized matter, chaos, right? Born of the black where the echoes collapse, right? It was a sound. It was a word. It was light. Let there be light. It was spoken word that began creation. That's where we're going with this.
Born of the black where the echoes collapse. Boundless the void until the spark made a map.
Boundless the void until the spark made a map. This is Jesus, right? Let there be light. He's making a map of creation.
Born of the black where the echoes collapse. Boundless the void until the spark made a map.
Cracked like a whip, the verb crafted the chaos. Twisting the worlds pinned together on the cross. So again, cracked like a whip. That movement of a wave. And the verb crafted the chaos, bringing things together again in our Herbig Haro Z-pinch plasma creation cosmology that I share in my Cosmism Manifesto. That's what this is. The last line there is twisting the worlds pinned together on a cross, and that's the form, the vortex form of a Birkeland current. It's a twisting, spinning, concentric rings within each other, spinning, pulling together, and pinching the matter. That's what I'm describing there. So it's great. So I kind of leave it there. Crafted the chaos, twisting the worlds, pinned together on the cross. And then let there be light. Then it's the first day.
Let there be light.
So here's your day one.
Yeah. Formed in the spirit realm, patterned in the council.
Formed in the spirit realm, patterned in the council. This is the premortal council and planning everything out, the spiritual creation before the physical enlargement. That's our
Yeah. Formed in the spirit realm, patterned in the council. Alpha and the Omega made the announcement. Light in a wave on a string in the face. Cymatics with the matter come and gather and obey.
So there it is right there. That's the plasma creation part of it that I'm throwing in, whereas Alpha and Omega made the announcement. Light in a wave, on a string, in a phase. Those are all light wave terms. Cymatics with the matter come and gather and obey. Cymatics is the manipulation of matter using sound, and saying the intelligence is there, come and obey. So it's just a creative way to do the first day of creation.
Alpha and the Omega made the announcement. Light in a wave on a string in the face. Cymatics with the matter come and gather and obey. And they
Called it day and night.
There was evening, there was morning.
And I have like this 8-bar echoing to kind of simulate the night, the shifting of a cycle. Day 2.
Up the voltage on the waters.
So what do I say? I say day 2, up the voltage on the waters. So again, using electrical terminology and on the dividing of the waters here.
Day 2, up the voltage on the waters. Separated charge, polar sons, polar daughters.
Separated charge, polar sons, polar daughters.
Separate.
This is the pulling matter, creating male, female, opposites, day and night. These are the things that went into creation in a chaotic environment, bringing order to it, where you have these parallels, these harmonies, these echoes.
Separated charge, polar sons, polar daughters. He drew the veil of currents tightly woven. The horn of light frozen, an arc of tongues cloven.
So let me bring those lyrics up there because it's a little wordy, but I say, he drew the veil of currents tightly woven. Again, talking about electricity. A horn of light frozen. A horn, right, would be the shape of these Birkeland currents, these cones. An arc of tongues cloven. Again, just more plasma electromagnetic language that I'm throwing into the dividing of the waters. The noble ones sang prayers, and the waters divided into the firm double layers. And so we're talking about the waters dividing the atmosphere, the space, the air we breathe, from the waters on the ground. Like the plasma and the loose matter starts to take their form. So that's what this is. And then plasma double layers, if you're familiar with plasma cosmology. These that's the language that I'm throwing in here to make it. So, and they called it atmosphere, and there was evening and there was morning. So this is good.
He drew the veil of currents tightly woven. The horn of light frozen, an arc of tongues cloven. The noble ones sang prayers, and the waters divided into the firm double layers. And they called it atmosphere. And there was evening, there was morning.
All right, then you got a little standard, then it's day 3.
Let the waters be gathered into the north. The land may appear that the earth brings forth.
So this is terra firma, right? We're having the creation of land. So that's what I'm saying there, is let the waters be gathered to the north. Again, this is you read in Doctrine and Covenants, the waters will return to the north, because that's what they were when they were first created, in this polar column where water and plasma and all these things protruded from the poles. So that's what we're seeing here. So it reveals the land underneath is what's going on. And so what else do I say?
Let the waters be gathered into the north. The land may appear that the earth brings forth. Bring the seeds of the plants and the fruit trees sow. Command them to rise up and then we watch them grow. Now the host is covered in water. Now the host is covered in bones. And they call it earth and sea. And there was evening and there was morning.
So those are the first 3 days, a little tease on a barding track that I've been thrown on. Probably not going to be popular. I don't care. Like, people are going to be like, "Wow, this is not catchy. It's not good." But to me, like, I like to listen to these kind of things. And when I'm out on my walks or on a drive or whatever, like this is the kind of music I listen to my own music. And so I'm making this to kind of encode these things I study to myself. So anybody else that likes that, that's what my music's for. So we'll stop the music for now. We'll maybe get into a little bit later after we read our next chapter in Call It Conspiracy. I would like to use this research time as well to start building out some of my. I want to present all of my songs. I've got over 100. I got 100 songs plus that are published that I'm going to make individual videos for, where I go lyric line by line explaining some of the symbolism, some of the doctrines, or all the doctrines that I'm throwing in there, just to make it more understandable. So my music can be, you can connect with it more. So we might do a little bit of that at the end with one of my songs, just to go through and writing it out. And then eventually I'll make a very official and formal and good looking video presentation, separate playlist of all my music, kind of diving into that. That's after I want to get into these things, but I'm still working on the Cosmism Manifesto. I've still got 3-4 essays that are in post-production, basically, that I'll release here at the end of the year. But this first 6 months of the year for me here, 2025, have been crazy. So I have not, this is my first research stream since, I don't know when my last ones were, 6 months ago, and I haven't released another Eternal Perspectives essay in that time. So I apologize that I kind of disappeared, but that's how life is. And when I'm not sorry, got distracted. When I'm not doing things, I'm not doing things. How about that? And that's kind of how it's been this year. I've had to focus my energy and attention on my family and a lot of other things that take precedent over these cool things that I get to share with you guys. But I think I'm cruising into a second half of 2025 where I should be able to pick this back up again and create and produce and put out the content that I visualize in my head that I'd like to share. So if you remember our last videos or whatever, this is our Perplexities research stream, informal. Obviously, you can tell by how I started this, with my bike off. But this is like my whiteboard, where we'll do a lot of research into the grand timeline and conspiracy, this map. We're going to build this out. This is very bare. See how there's not a lot here, but there's a lot of space. I hope that in a year or two or however much time we get together and I keep doing this, that we'll just fill this all up and we'll just have a great resource to be able to dive in and understand things in parallel, whether it's the restoration and conspiracy going on, or that's basically it. So let's see where we left off. It was chapter 3. I'm going to need to pull up a browser so we can get that reading. I guess I can just do it in this one. So I'll get my Kindle reader up. And this chapter is titled The Moneymakers. Or The Money Manipulators, I guess. I keep thinking makers because there's a book that goes along with this whole topic that I've got. And I've got maybe I'll create a book list for this section of Babylon's banksters. This is what it is. And this is sadly where I've seen people online that are members of the church dismiss None Dare Call It Conspiracy, the book that Ezra Taft Benson, this is what we're reading. Call It Conspiracy is the sequel. It's just updated. None Dare Call It Conspiracy, the book Ezra Taft Benson recommended. And people have said that it's anti-Semitic or something, that as soon as you start talking about the money manipulators, the bankers, you're somehow anti-Jew and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's not it. You need to hold some ideas in your head. And I made a thread on this on Twitter. Let me actually read that, because I think this is good. This fits into kind of stepping into this whole topic. So x.com. And howdy. Let's see. I think I saw somebody say there, howdy, Leon McBain. Welcome. And I'm terrible at keeping track of my stream. I don't even know how many people are watching right now, if any. But if you do leave a comment, I will look here occasionally. Oh, we got 5 viewers. Awesome. Bless you guys. Bless you, bless you, bless you. All right. Then let's get into it. So let me sign in to Twitter. And I figured out a lot of technical problems too that I was having before with like streaming on this computer at the same time as watching YouTube videos at the same time I'm streaming. It wouldn't work. It was very choppy. And unfortunately, I don't have a fix for that. It's just my hardware. I need my GPU's like from 2011, 2012 or something like that. This whole system is Windows 7 still. So I need an upgrade desperately, but again, not something that's on my docket at the moment. Not on the priority list. And I'm not signed into my Twitter, and I'm not going to on here. So let me just find myself. Elon Tanner. There I am. I'll bring me over here so you can see what I'm doing. And I was kind of disappointed that when I put this poll up to see what everybody wanted to hear me talk about, for like 3 hours, I only had like 150 views on it. It's like, it says I have thousands of followers, but when I actually put content up that I want some interaction with, it's like it got buried. But thank you for voting. Clearly, we just want to keep going with conspiracy, or call it conspiracy. That's great. But man, it's hard to see. I have it all in dark mode on my phone, so I guess I can change that here to whatever. I don't ever access Twitter on desktop usually. But no, it's not this one. It's the court Jew comment I made. I was thinking about this a while ago, a couple days ago. This. So there's a question. I'll just pose it. Say, have you ever wondered why the Gentile nations, and again, in our conversation when we're talking about Gentiles, we're literally talking about the times of the Gentiles, which the Lord basically instituted at the scattering of Israel, when Israel mucked up their opportunity to become daughter of Zion, to become led by the king himself and elevated to his bosom. They were scattered throughout the nations, and the Gentiles were given a chance to rule the world, essentially. And that's why the Book of Mormon starts from there. That's what that Exodus is all about. They're leaving Jerusalem. Jerusalem gets sacked by Babylon, or the Assyrians come in before and take the 10 tribes. Like, then the world takes over in terms of government and dominance and everything like that. And what did we say happened? And even before this happened, but I'm more focused on the Gentiles. That's why I say Gentile. And even the Egyptians of Abraham and Joseph's day and Jacob's day, they were the Gentiles, basically. So it's the same. But Joseph was taken in and elevated to a high position in Egypt with Pharaoh. You had Daniel in Babylon. You had Mordecai, and I mean, you had Daniel in Persia as well when Cyrus takes over, and Daniel's still in the court there. But also Mordecai and Esther, they're in positions of authority, as advisors, administrators, those kind of things. And then in Rome, in Greece, you actually had a whole interaction of this as well. I didn't put it in my tweet here, but I could have put Greece in there as well, that they were known to also use foreigners and Jews and Israelites as administrators and things like that. Or there was this similar exchange that I'm getting at with this tweet. So what do I say? I say the international banking cartel and the Gentile elite of medieval Europe have morphed into a mystery Babylon of the latter days. The feet and the toes, the bottom of the image seen by Daniel, the first court factor of scattered Israel. Why? And I'm saying Daniel is the first court factor. When I say court factor, you could say court Jew, right? That's a common, and you look at Wikipedia, that's what it's called, court Jew, court factor. And like in The Chosen, right? Matthew is very well portrayed as this, as the hated tax collector, publican type, or he would have been like a court Jew. He gets pulled in by the Romans, that they trust him, and they have him kind of be their intelligence, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here, to various degrees and levels. So, got some pictures here. This one's of Joseph in Egypt. This is Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the man, that reign of the Gentiles. And then here you have Esther. And then in here, this was just a Roman soldier and, tax collector, Jewish tax collector, kind of drive home the point. So what was witnessed in Joseph and Daniel and his companions by these kings that led them to elevate them? We know it was with Joseph and with Daniel. It was their ability to speak to God, to be able to call on personal or revelation for the king, actually, to interpret his dreams, to interpret the dreams of the baker and who was the other one? The baker and the cupbearer, right? In Joseph's day. It's so that's what I'm getting at with this question. What was witnessed in Joseph and Daniel and his companions? What does Israel understand that makes them stand out for this type of role, this trusted advisor, treasury, money keeper role? Well, it was divine access. It was true priesthood power. They had this official authority, this responsibility. It was part of their blood, their nature, their culture, to understand covenantal identity, right? Exchanges, law. They were literate in these things. They had strict moral orders. And so this makes them dependable, reliable, honorable, right? It also makes them the opposite if it's abused. Like with great blessings, are great things are required of you. The higher your blessings, the higher the probability your fall when you apostatize, right? It's the extremes. It's that polarity. And that's exactly the case we see with Israel being given the opportunity to be a daughter of Zion, like Melchizedek in his city, like Enoch, like the patriarchs, like all of the fathers, back to Adam, right? And when they failed, they were basically scattered to the dust of the earth to be ground into polvo, into dust throughout all the world. But it was to the benefit of the world. And it was in the foresight of God that he knew this would happen even in Abraham's day. And that's the Abrahamic covenant, is that through his seed, all the world would be blessed as Israel is scattered throughout all the globe here. And then now here at the second coming in the last days, that we would all be harvested again and brought back to the covenant, brought back into this priesthood covenantal identity. So in the modern established state of Israel, here I'm posing, again, this is Socratic questions that I do. And I think they don't always come off as me just posing like a Socratic question. Like I'm wanting to get you to think. I'm not trying to tell you I have all the answers to this or that this is that, or I'm saying these are questions that we should be asking when we're talking about these things. So I said, is the modern established state of Israel, right, in the last 70 years, at the seeming epicenter of Gentile hegemonic intelligence? What do I mean by that? I mean, the Gentiles clearly, the West clearly has power over the world right now. And the modern state of Israel, in its creation, in its elevation by MI6, by the CIA, by, they're the ones that helped them create their Mossad, their intelligence agencies. That's why in NCIS and every police propaganda show that you have here, or intelligence propaganda show you have here in America, how is the Mossad portrayed? But the top of the top. No, they know Cobb McGraw. They're super secret. They got resources and networks you don't even know about, and they're just always constantly in trouble, and you don't ever have to, you always got to be watching your back with the Mossad. Like, they are talked up in all of the propaganda we watched as being like smack dab in the middle of all intelligence spy games going on, and basically like the best at it, right? That's how they're portrayed. That's what I'm getting at. And the truth is that's kind of how they've been used. They've been used as a skin suit by the Gentile secular Satanists, right? They've been propped up as something they can blame. And I get to this here. So I went over the positives on why you would use Israelites, covenantal people, Jews, right? Why would you use them to manage your money? Why would you use them to administer your government, administer your economy, like Joseph or whatever it is, right? Why would you use these people? We went over those. Now, there are some negative, nefarious, I mentioned a few positive reasons, having an outsider like in Israel come into your Gentile court. What are some darker, more politically expedient reasons, right? How about they're a ready scapegoat? You can blame them if anything goes wrong. And that's exactly what we've seen happen over the in the latter days. That though they may be involved in a lot of the big financial moves going on, they're being thrown out as the fodder. They're being thrown out as the front line of a deep conspiracy, and they're the ready scapegoat. So keep that in mind. This is how they've always been used going back too, that this is, you use somebody from the outside in, and then you can shed them while keeping your family bloodlines and everything going on and the ruling class, established. So they're also a financial firewall, right? Again, going in the scapegoat idea that there's this protection of if anything financially bad goes on, with the king, or people start to see into the king's finances that he's funding both sides of the wars or whatever it is. Easy. It's a Jewish conspiracy, right? That's what they do. This is the opposite of what we're doing in our effort here with Perplexities. This is the opposite of what is being suggested in None Dare Call It Conspiracy. They nip that right in the bud right away. And we already talked about that in earlier streams. They mention it straight out that it's naive, but it's common for somebody, once they begin to pierce the veil of conspiracy, pierce the veil of, wow, normal world is not normal. They've been lying to me. Well, a lot of people will swing the pendulum too far to one side or the other, or they'll just get caught in a pendulum wild swing one side or the other all the time. They'll never have a center of equilibrium if they don't have an anchor, a foundation. The gospel is that foundation. Your temple covenants are that foundation. Your personal revelation relationship with Jesus is that anchor. So anyways, it's important. I lost my train of thought, but okay, financial firewall, scapegoat. They're also used, in a more nefarious or politically expedient way by Gentiles as intelligence collection. Just like we saw, just like Matthew is in The Chosen, right? He's basically tattling for the Romans on those who are avoiding their taxes. So that's a very crude, low form of intelligence. Now we look at the Jeffrey Epstein stuff going on today, right? And that some of his biggest funders and backers, like Alex Wexner, or whoever, these people are deeply tied to Israel, have Israel's interests at heart, and they're not really like, well, we'll just say it's all the parts of what we're talking about are there today if we would see it for what it is. And I don't like seeing so many people who should know better, especially from our faith, members of the church, who want to be all anti-Jew, anti-Semitic, like blame the Jews for everything. They never express this dichotomy, this paradox that Israel finds itself in, that the Jews find themselves in. And this is prophesied too. This is not like a surprise, like, oh my gosh, they're so dumb. What's going on? We know that when the times of the Gentiles ends, the Lord will switch his focus from the Gentiles, us, to the Jews, right? They still have opportunity. They will be converted when Christ comes himself. Yeah, they might be the last ones out of the 12, right? But does it matter that the Lord loves them and keeps them? I look, again, back to Judah and Joseph's situation. Here we are, the modern church, Joseph, established in Egypt to prepare the way to survive a famine that is coming at this second advent, for the return of the 10 tribes to come in and receive safety during that famine, during that advent, right? And the Jews we will also send help to. And in the end, they will also be united with all of Israel. All of us will be elevated and exalted. Everyone will come to see eye to eye. So it's borderline retarded when I see members of the church who have no idea what the history of Israel is or how Israel is being used today in the grand chessboard by these Gentile Satanists, these secularists, okay? So they're pawns in elite political games as well. They're used to stir families and bloodlines against each other, and we're seeing it today. I grew up never once like hearing a lot of anti-Semitic stuff. I grew up in the 85, right? 85 through, I would say, 2004, even 2012. I didn't hear much about Israel, or my friends and I, like, we did make Jew jokes about like Jew noses and things like that. So like maybe there was some just in general stereotypes, but every culture, every person, every people has that. The anti-Semitism that we're seeing today, though, is manufactured. It feels very revealing, right? That these things that have been set up to be thrown at us as a firewall are now being thrown at us as a firewall, and a lot of us are failing the test at understanding what's being on, that there's something behind the superficial things we see going on right now. It's not one-sided, but many young men learning about the world in an internet age pretend that it is. So I say, you have the Melchizedek priesthood. Act like you remember the covenant given to Abraham through his seed. Act like you know the story of Israel. Act like you understand that the gathering is the most important thing happening on the earth. Act like the Messiah doesn't miss. He's not confused about what's happening. You are. I am. We are. He's not. He knew Judas would do. He knew what Judas would do. It didn't stop the kingdom. He knows what Judah is doing now, and it doesn't stop the kingdom. So I had these thoughts, and I think it fits perfectly into what we're going to read here as kind of a cover to say, like, when you're talking about Babylon's banksters of the latter days and how the Jews are so close and tied to it, it all goes back to the temple. It all goes back to weights and measures, and the Jews and those with custodianship over the temple having that ability to, from their position of authority in doing the right thing with weights and measures and being honest, being dishonest and fudging the numbers, fudging the silver content or the gold content in your coins, right? That's what they were doing back with the Romans. They were kind of scamming the Romans out of money with the temple exchange rates and things like that going on. This is the crux of it. It's temple doctrine if you're looking at finances, and people don't see it that way. They don't see that finances anciently, before modern banking and let's say before the Enlightenment forward, banks, money, the monetary system, this was temple doctrine. This was housed out of the augur. This was housed out of the most trusted priesthood of your civilization, right? That's why this kind of stuff would have happened at the temple. Also, your offerings and things like that. It's just it would be the most honest place to have your money being administered. Obviously, we don't do that now. It's very, very much corrupted. Okay, so enough of me rambling about this stuff. Let's see. Agreed. Very much manufactured. Yes. Lord has not forgotten his people. All right. So chapter 3, the money manipulators. And what I do, just again, I'm reminding myself for this as well as anybody else tuning in and listening. But as I read through this, I'm going to look up words and do the research and study things as I would had like if I didn't know anything about this. Or I'm going to try to do that. I mean, I know a lot of these names. I've read this book already a lot of times. Like, this is not my first time reading it, but I'm going to read it as if I were reading it the first time. For anybody coming in to say like, okay, how should I study these things, or how does he study these things? I want to kind of give that, like how I would do that if I was reading this the first time. So we're going to go through that. I'm going to stop a lot, and it'll take us a bit, but we'll do this. Chapter 3, the money manipulators. Many college history professors tell their charges that the books they will be using in the class are objective. But stop and ask yourself, is it possible to write a history book without a particular point of view? The answer is no. There are billions of events which take place in the world today, or each day. To think of writing a complete history of a nation covering even a year is absolutely incredible. Not only is a historian's ability to write an objective history limited by the sheer volume of happenings, but by the fact that many of the most important happenings never appear in the papers or even in somebody's memoirs. The decisions reached by the big boys in the smoke-filled rooms are not reported even in the New York Times, which ostensibly reports all the news that is fit to print. Parentheses, all the news that fits is a more accurate description, right? It's like whatever they want to put in. And we see that today with, I mean, what was the Wall Street Journal revealing today is some stick figure drawing from the president. And a lot of people, hopefully none of you, are going to believe that this is real. This is all manufactured. Everything happening right now is manufactured, and it's centered around Israel. So it's interesting, right? And it's centered around central banking. It's centered around the monetary system. What are we talking about but Bitcoin and blockchain the last 10 years, 20 years? A change in monetary system. What is Agenda 2030 about? These Gentile world makers. They're going to change the economic system. The bubble they have created with our central bank here in America is bursting. Okay? This matters. All of everything you see happening today that everybody's so emotionally pulled left to right, it is all sewn together in this. That it's not just, oh, we're going to go get the corrupt deep staters in. Oh, it's just Jeffrey Epstein and all those pedophiles, right? How could they? That's not it. There's way more than the abuse of children, which should be the worst. But they use all of this as cover for how they control and pull the strings financially, governmentally, administratively, and in every way possible, like we look at here in our mapping, right? When we're talking about this vast conspiracy of these manipulators, this is what we're talking about. They're pillars. Oh man, normally I have when I'm recording and things, I've got a wind mask so I don't pop the microphone like that all the time, but it's just in my face. It would cover me up. So I apologize. I keep popping the microphone. I think it's worse for me in my ears than on the recording or for you guys. But here are the societal pillars of subversion we're talking about. And all of them revolve around a monetary system. Like you need the money to fund a lot of this subversion that goes on in these other areas. So it's important to get the money system and control in first. This happened. We're gonna read about it, right? But you guys know the Federal Reserve instituted in 1913, the Titanic. There's a conspiracy that involves that. There's so much. The Creature at Jekyll Island is a book you should read that I'll recommend. Maybe we throw that on here. All of this stuff, yes, it was established and set up. They would pump the currency. They would cause depressions. They would cause inflation. They would pop the bubbles they would make, all in an effort to manipulate society, all in an effort to transfer resources from the ignorant to the rich, right? From the poor to the rich, and from the rich to the rich they didn't like, right? It was always an extraction and a manipulation of money and agency. This is satanic. This is exactly what's going on, though. So these are their pillars of subversion. They've got to throw it at all of them, right? They're all working at the same time. And if you look at our society today, every single one of these things is humming with Satan's reversal. He's totally going at us right now in all of these areas. Government and political systems. How many elections, how much political assassinations and attempts and all kinds of things are going on right now? How much world war is going on right now? How many big moves? Russia, Ukraine, NATO, Israel, Gaza, the whole Iran. It's all India, Pakistan, China, Taiwan, coast to coast, all across the globe. You have government and political systems being upturned right now, being rearranged. I have a thread, and we've talked about it maybe before, that war, to me, is a ritual act of consolidation. Those with power and the money, you fund both sides, you get the war to go so you can redraw border lines and reissue money or take money and issue it to yourself, right? It's a way to expand your reach, expand your empire, is war. It's conflict, violence, the removal of agency. This is what we're dealing with. So you have government and political systems. Do we see that in upheaval right now in turmoil? Banking and finance. What is the whole tariff conversation of the last 6 months with, oh my gosh, the world has been taking advantage of America? Well, guess what? That was intentional. That was manufactured. We have been raped. We have been pillaged. Our entire economy for the last 70 plus 100 years. since the inception of the Federal Reserve. And since the, after the Industrial Revolution, where we were on our feet and on our way to become just industrial powerhouse, we were kneecapped. And here we go again, trying to reverse a lot of that. Media and information, is that corrupt, guys? Education system, we'll read about that. We'll study about that. The Rockefellers, the very people we're going to talk about taking over central banks and things, they funded the General Education Board back in the 1900s. They bought, and they're the ones curating the textbooks that we read. They're the ones that are deciding what you learn in school about them or about what's going on. So the education system is absolutely compromised. Religion and spirituality, are these subverted as well? Are there perhaps religious movements and religions, and even within our own movement, have there been attempts to wrestle it away from the prophets and the apostles? You guys remember the story of James Strange and John Bennett? Are you familiar with the Order of the Halcyon of the Illuminati and their attempt to take over our church after Joseph's assassination? This is all relevant. Religion and spirituality. I would say even the New Age movement is part of this. The whole UFO psyop is tied into this New Age theosophical movement of these occultists trying to push a new religion on us and delete our ancient mythologies and our old traditions, our old understandings of the earth and of reality. They're trying to erase that through their control of education, government, money, science, technology, military, defense, healthcare, everything. With that, they are changing our spirituality fundamental. That's Satan's goal, right? His goal is to destroy and to submit our spirits. You do that by taking all of our carnal things and controlling them, right? So military and defense, healthcare, occult power, magic, like all of these things is what I'm talking about. These are the pillars of subversion that all go into controlling a society, taking it over by secret conspiracy. And we're witnessing every single one of these today, once again, being turned. Once again, a consolidation is taking place. And we don't see it happening like, oh, it just happened yesterday. It takes time. It's a slow-moving machine. Big wheels turn slow. Not only is a historian's ability to be objective, blah, 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 I read that. Okay, the decisions, the big boys, they make it, going back, third paragraph here. Sometimes I have to read through and just make sure where I'm at. That's what I'm doing there. In order to build his case, a historian must select from a minuscule number of facts from the limited number that are known. If he does not have a theory, how does he separate important facts from the unimportant ones? As Professor Stuart Crane has pointed out, this is why every book proves the author's thesis, but no book is objective. No book can be objective, and this book is not objective. I even say that in my Cosmism Manifesto when I'm right at the beginning. I'm like, I'm not objective in what I'm doing and how I'm interpreting reality and synthesizing it to the gospel. I am very much biased towards the gospel and the restoration and the doctrines that we believe and bringing everything else to it, not the reverse. And there are people on my YouTube videos, my comments and stuff like, oh, this is cool what you're talking about, Leland, but why are you restricting yourself with the words of these prophets and blah, blah, blah? And why don't you just chase the data where it goes? And it's like, no, you're telling me to let go of my anchor. You're telling me to, like, the things I know have helped me to collect what I've got to this point. You're telling me to get rid of it, to let go. It's just not right. No book can be objective, and this book is not objective. Liberal reviewers should have a ball quoting that out of context, he says. The information in it is true, but the book is not objective. We have carefully selected the facts to prove our case. We believe that most other historians have focused on the landscape and ignored that which is most important: the cart, the boy, and the donkey. This goes back to his the imagery he was creating at the beginning, where it's like a magic eye, where you have a hidden image where you've got a whole lot going on, and if you can focus right, there's actually a picture of a boy, a cart, and a donkey moving along. But there's so much going on in the background and stuff, it's hard to see. But once you focus on the boy, the cart, and the donkey, you can't not see it anymore. It just pops out. It jumps out at you. That's what he's describing, this piercing the veil of secrecy and conspiracy to see, oh, what's going on behind the curtains. It's not the Wizard of Oz that we just accept his word from the smoke and mirrors. It's some old, cranky old pervert behind the scenes manipulating everyone. That's exactly what's going on today. Okay. Most of the facts which we bring out are readily verifiable at any large library, but our contention is that we have arranged these facts in the order in which most accurately reveals their true significance in history. These are the facts of the establishment. These are the facts the establishment does not want you to know. Have you ever had the experience of walking into a mystery movie 2/3 of the way through? Confusing, wasn't it? All the evidence made it look as if the butler was the murderer, but in the final scenes you find out, surprisingly, that it was the man's wife all along. You have to stay and see the beginning of the film. Then, as all the pieces fall into place, the story makes sense. This whole concept is just ringing to me right now with what's going on with the Epstein files, what's going on with Donald Trump and the conspiracies around him, and the Russia gate, the impeachment gate, the 2020 election hoax, that the 50 intelligence agents talking about Hunter Biden's laptop was not real. Our intelligence agencies have conspired to subvert our government right in front of our eyes just recently. And a lot of people waking up to this, they're coming into this movie of conspiracy and what's going on and thinking, oh, I know what's going on. Why would Donald Trump do this? Why is this going on? And they just get flustered. They get wrapped up in this emotional reactionary state. And that's not how you relate it to what he's talking about here about a movie. A lot of people waking up now, even me, because I was born in 1985. I have no ability, unless I'm studying diligently and I'm trying, to really comprehend what has happened up until my birth in terms of control, my environment, the landscape, right? And here we have now people in a modern age in 2025, maybe they woke up in 2020, 5 years ago, because of COVID or something. And they're like, oh, wow, I got to really study all this stuff. And now they're the experts. Now they want to get on X and on Twitter and tell me exactly how they see the landscape of things going on. Brother, you just came into the movie and it's 5 minutes to go before it's over. And now you want to tell me you have it all figured out? That's how I feel when I see everybody out there making their political commentary. That's just so detached from the conspiracy of history. So detached from what President Benson and people like Gary Allen here in Call It Conspiracy have literally pointed at the monster behind the curtain for 100 years, plus more. Joseph Smith was pointing at it. The Lord was telling him, hey, your enemy is combined. Even back then, the dispensation of deceit was rising. The prophets of Satan were being called and doing their work and putting together their communism manifesto and all of their central banking apparatuses, right? And their military power to buy up armies and navies and reign with blood and terror and horror on the earth. This has been happening. And it's frustrating because as someone who has been very much excited to talk about other members of the church about this kind of thing and constantly running into members of the church who are like oil and water with this, who will not entertain ideas of even reading a book like this and exploring, oh, how does that relate to what's going on in the world today? President Benson literally gave us lists of books to read that do this. And yet we're somehow hesitant to jump in and have trust that, guess what? Maybe the Lord knows what's going on and he's provided a way for us to see through all of the deception, at least generally, and make out who are the good people and who are the bad people, who's really trying to take over the freedom and agency of all nations, and who is looking out for maybe protecting the Constitution so that we can continue to have religious freedom. This situation, starting up again, sorry, my rants. This situation is very similar to the one in which millions of Americans find themselves today. They are confused by current happenings in the nation. They have come in as the movie, so to speak, is going into its conclusion. The earlier portion of the mystery is needed to make the whole thing understandable. Actually, we're not really starting at the beginning. We're going back far enough to give meaning to today's happenings. That's what he's saying. He's like, in this book, they're talking about money manipulators. They're not even going back to the beginning because the beginning happens in Rome, in Babylon, in going back even further, right? It's this same coherent occult group manipulating money and control and domination over the world. So in order to understand the conspiracy, it's necessary to have some rudimentary knowledge of banking and particularly of international bankers. While it would be an oversimplification to ascribe the entire conspiracy to international bankers, they nevertheless have played a key role. Think of the conspiracy as a hand with one finger labeled international banking, others foundations, the anti-religious movement, the Fabian socialism, and communism, right? He's basically giving 5 pillars of subversion or 5 tools of subversion that they're using, kind of like my list of pillars of subversion. But it was the international bankers of whom Professor Quigley was speaking when we quote him earlier. Let's pull that up, right? Let's throw this on our thing. This is something I want to do. Quigley, it's Tragedy and Hope is what he's referencing. Tragedy and Hope. And now Quigley, I think he's an economics professor. I don't know. I don't know exactly what his credentials or academics are. He's very respected academically, but he was a part of the deep state. He was a part of the globalists and admitted it as much in his book, Tragedy and Hope. And I want a cover of it because I want to throw the cover in. Here we go. So I'm just going to copy that, and we'll make a little book list. Well, we've got this Proofs of Conspiracy by John Robeson here. We'll throw our books here. Just kind of have a list of some books. Let's get, I dare call it Conspiracy. We'll get a bigger image. And this book I've got here, which I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not. It's called The President Makers by Don Fotheringham. And this one came out within the last 15 years. Excellent, excellent. Goes through the Industrial Revolution, the rise of our robber barons of America and their incestuous ties with the empire, with basically Great Britain, the spy networks of economic control and money manipulation that goes there, that we have our own little American traders that are cultivated and spawned and then whipped up to be the pillars upon which this international banking cabal sets up its roots in America. So let me get that book too, so that you know about that. It's called The President Makers. I'd even be willing to go and read through a lot of this with you guys on a stream like this because I think it's worth it. And it's not that I think I'm converting a million people to believe like I believe, but if perchance a conversation comes up with somebody where they're interested in this kind of thing, I want to be able to have a playlist for them to be like, you know what? I actually studied a lot of this stuff and made videos if you're willing to, watch them. Just to have any opportunity to share this kind of knowledge and this understanding with as many people as possible. Because I don't hardly ever get any actual opportunities to just sit and have conversations with people about this kind of stuff to this depth. So this is the book. Again, I highly recommend you get it. It's called The President Makers. Okay. And then, let's see. I would even throw in like Ezra Taft Benson's An Enemy. An Enemy Hath Done This, I think is what it's called. Pretty sure. Yep, this would be another good one to throw into a reading list for this type of stuff. Let's throw that here. And I mentioned it, but also I'll throw it in since I mentioned it. But the Creature of Jekyll Island. Creature of Jekyll Island. And this book goes over the creation of the Federal Reserve, which we'll talk about here. But again, another, I would say, must-read book. And that's probably good to start with. I wouldn't even say you have to read Tragedy and Hope. It's a long book. It's very boring, but revealing. So, and then Derek Call Conspiracy is easy. It's a small book, like we're reading, very quick. President Makers, you could read that quick or in sections and chunks. An Enemy Hath Done This is long, it's big, it's full of a lot of scriptures and things like that as well, and not so conspiratorial, but definitely supports everything we're talking about. And The Creature of Jekyll Island, I have that on audiobook. I listen to that frequently from time to time again, just to kind of refresh on it. But these are all so dense with so many names and dates and organizations and things like that, that you can't just read them one time and be like, oh yeah, I know that stuff. Yeah, I know it. I've seen that book. Like, you've got to be constantly refreshing. You've got to be constantly looking at how these things connect. Otherwise, it goes away. It goes away. So again, I think of studying, I think of learning this way. So good. So there's some good books. We'll keep that book list going as we continue reading. But so that's who he's referencing here is Professor Quigley. He says, but it was the international bankers of whom Professor Quigley was speaking when we quoted him earlier in stating that their aim was nothing less than control of the world through finance. And yeah, we did talk about that. I'm not going to go back and find it, but it's in one of the previous streams. I know I'm remembering because that was months ago for me. So, okay, where do governments get the enormous amounts of money they need? Most, of course, comes from taxation. But governments often spend more than they are willing to tax from their citizens, and so are forced to borrow. Our national debt is now $455 billion. What is it now? What is our national? It's like trillions, I'm pretty sure. Here's our national debt clock. I don't know who made this website. It's not the government, but yeah, 5 trillion. Oh, no. Just kidding. Oh, there it goes popping again. Just kidding. About 37 trillion. Yeah, just a little bit more. So we're at 37 trillion, whereas in the book here, and when was this? It came out in the 80s, I want to say. 455 billion, and now we're at 40 trillion, basically. So every cent of it borrowed at interest from somewhere else. So when you borrow money, you don't just get to use the money, right? You end up having to pay interest on the money that you borrow. And that's what these central banks control, the interest rates, right? So there are 3 things central banks, there's a lot of things they do. excuse me. But the three major things, like our Federal Reserve, what do? They print money, they set interest rates, and they basically manage inflation. These they pump up the bubbles and pop them, and they set the interest rates, how much we owe them, which affects, again, finances, and everything trickles down. So these guys are basically put in this position with these three levers to just kind of control our money, and they make money off of it, and it's probably fake money that they just make up. That's what usury is, right? Like you're offering somebody money at a debt, and you're basically creating money out of nothing. And you can't. I'm not the greatest at explaining this. Again, I'm a cosmic guy. I'm a cosmology guy. I'm not a finance guy or economics guy, but I understand this, like, at the core. I'm not great at describing it. But it's usury, and it's ancient. This is the same sin of money manipulators going into the past. So most government bonds, except those owned by the government itself through its trust funds, are held by vast banking firms known as international banks. So it's like this cartel, this club of international banks. So you can't just point to one and be like, oh, it's just the Federal Reserve. I mean, if we got rid of the Federal Reserve, that'd be a big deal. But you'd need to also make moves to decentralize and break up the other international cartels that have kind of shouldered up and created a phalanx with the Federal Reserve across the world. And that's what I see happening right now in the economic war games of geopolitics. The things going on with threatening, Jerome Powell stepping down at the end of next year. That's a big deal. And you have guys like Mike Lee or others, and forever, the John Birch Society and everybody else have been talking about, like, end the Fed. Get rid of the Fed, right? Get rid of it. We don't need it. It's corrupt. It's the one causing our problems, our bubbles. And yeah, so it's a banking conspiracy, and it's true. It's real. For centuries, there has been big money to be made by the international bankers in the financing of governments and kings. So this is what we're going to focus on. Financing governments and kings. That's what these international bankers do. Such operators are faced, however, with certain thorny problems. We know that smaller banking operators or operations protect themselves by taking collateral. But what kind of collateral can you get from a government or a king? And collateral, if you don't know, it's I'm going to get a loan to get a car. Or no, yeah, I'll get a loan to get a car, and I'm going to put down my house as collateral. My house has enough value that if I somehow couldn't, I mean, that's probably not the greatest collateral to throw down for a car, but if I couldn't somehow pay my car, the house and its value would cover the cost. I would have to sell the house and get the money, or they would come and take my house if I had no means of selling it or anything like that. Like, that's what collateral is. You put something up against what you're borrowing. But how do you get collateral from a king or a government? That's can you get collateral from a king or a government? I want to highlight that because that's important. What if the banker comes to collect and the king says, off with his head? The process through which one collects a debt from a government or a monarch is not a subject taught in the business schools of our universities. And most of us, never having been in the business of financing kings, have not given the problem much thought. And honestly, most of conspiracy awareness, this is the problem. This is the problem for most people. They don't give it a thought. They don't think. And that's what gets me angry, is that when you do start to think, for me, it was like, why is nobody else thinking? And it gets a little crazy. Okay, but there is a king financing business, and to those who can ensure collection, it is lucrative indeed. Economics professor Stuart Crane, I'm gonna look him up because this is a name that I just kind of gloss over every time, but let's go ahead and look up Stuart Crane just so we know who we're talking about. Stuart Crane, professor. Proofs of Conspiracy, Dr. Stuart Crane. Let's see if I can find a quick summary of him. I don't always just click on the first link. You shouldn't either. This is like search results 101. And I don't know. So what I will do is, instead of using this, we'll use ChatGPT. For things like this, it is appropriate, in my mind, when you want a summary of something and a general internet search is not happening for you. I would say, who is Stuart Crane referenced in Call It Conspiracy? This should give us a quick little overview of Stuart. This is for me too. Here's what I found. In the book, Alan cites economics professor Stuart Crane, noting his insights on how international bankers collateralize loans, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So he's a PhD, also delivered a seminar titled Proofs of Conspiracy. Again, that's the name of that book by John Robeson. On November 1st, 1969. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. Like, what time period is this guy in? So he's, in his academic heights in 60s, 70s. Blah, blah, blah. So the Stuart Crane and Undare Cult conspiracy appears to be this academic, an economics professor and seminar speaker, whose work influenced Allen's narrative. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's good to know. Stuart Crane conspiracies. Let's see. Oh my gosh, it's 5 hours. It's like me.
I never know where I'm going to go anyway. I'll just try to take you along. I better get these.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because that looks cool. That's something I could listen to on a road trip or something.
I better get these coins out of my pocket.
So I'm going to save that video for myself to a playlist. Perfect. Okay. So there's that. Let's get back to our book. So economics professor Stuart Crane notes that there are two means used to collateralize loans to governments and kings. Whenever a business firm borrows big money, its creditor obtains a voice in management to protect its investment. So like somebody from your organization will go on the board of directors for the company or another firm or something like that, so that you have some stake. You get some power to be able to manipulate them to your benefit if needed, or to argue a point to your benefit in that kind of position. So it's taking money to give up basically autonomy of your government is what these people are participating in when big banks come in like this. So like a business, no government can borrow big money unless willing to surrender to the creditor some measure of sovereignty as collateral. Certainly, international bankers who have loaned hundreds of billions of dollars to governments around the world command considerable influence in the policies of such governments. The ultimate advantage the creditor has over the king or president is that if the ruler gets out of line, the banker can finance his enemy or rival. So this is the crux of understanding international banking, is that when you're financing governments and kings, how do you get collateral? How do you collect? How do you punish someone who might be abusing your system or trying to get out of it? You finance the other side of their enemy, and you basically put them down. That's how you get collateral in government and king financing. So therefore, if you want to stay in the lucrative king financing business, it is wise to have an enemy or rival waiting in the wings to unseat every king or president to whom you lend. If the king doesn't have an enemy, you must create one. All right, so I want to go back to our map here and just look at history. We know the central bank came in. Let me find a better timeline with these wars. Yeah, World War I starts 1919, around there. Or it was before that, I guess, where it's starting. America gets involved around there. But in the between 1910 and 1920 is when World War I starts. And it was the central bank was thrown in right here, boom, right after 1910. Just throw it in here. So we have the central bank installed, essentially. Late at night, at the end of the year, right before Christmas, they pass the legislation to get the Federal Reserve in. And then from there, what does the international Gentile cartel do? I see it as Great Britain, like the empire, the old empire that is mad that we left. They're the ones kind of as the front face, the first face of the oligarchy or the deep state is what I would say. I'd say MI6, like their intelligence, their underground occult networks that manage their kings, their bloodlines. That's what I think is the first driving force behind everything going on right now. But that's neither here nor there. So they start us with World War I. Boom, they get us into a war. They want us to go fight the Germans, right? The evil Germans who were, again, fighting this. There's a whole financial angle to all of these wars that revolve around international banking control, central banks being installed and bringing nations into their financial scheme, their money laundering scheme, basically. And so they get us into World War I. Then in the 20s, they drop our economy and throw us into, or no, it's the Roaring 20s. At the very end, they throw us into Great Depression, leading into the 30s. And then as time goes on more, you get another war. And the global threat for World War I and World War II was fascism and communism, right? Socialism. These are the isms of the communists, the League of the Just, right? The Illuminati, these people trying to implement types of governments that are conducive to manipulation from the outside and create a good slave state, a good consumer class. And that's exactly what we've turned into. But so you had World War I, World War II, communism, fascism. These are the things. These are the boogeymen that the bankers can throw up on either side to be like, oh, we got Hitler over here, we got Mussolini over here, we got this over here, and they just pit them against each other. And when one of them turns, like when Hitler was trying to get the central banks out of Germany, boom, they just collapse him with the other enemies. They know who to put their finance in. And what did they do? They took all of the Nazi scientists and administrators and the smart people and all of the people who were useful, and they redistributed them out through Operation Paperclip and others to all the other allied nations, right? And others to keep their foot soldiers, because that's who they were. The Nazis were their own foot soldiers, to keep them and the whole plan of subverting everyone going. And so post World War II, you have our spy networks and a Cold War and nuclear threats and all of these other unseen, unknown terror mechanisms that are launched upon the world. So post World War II, you have democracy now being taken by force by the Americans, who are actually a puppet of these oligarchs, these elite occult oligarchs who have been subverting us, and now they're using us like a skin suit, and they go around all the world causing terror and war to get one nation or another to topple and then rolled into their financial system. This could be super detailed, diving into every decade, every war that we have, and showing with the evidence how this is possible with the financing, with the bankers, with the same people financing both sides of all of these wars and situations. Now, fast forward to our time period. What's going on? In the 90s, me growing up, right? We had this new world order take over here in America with the CIA assassinating Kennedy and everyone else who would stand up to him and putting in their own intel guys like the Bushes. And these are basically Nazis, the Bushes and everybody else that were elevated to status and intelligence positions in our government, and now have basically run amok, throwing terror out to all the other world and all the other nations that still had not capitulated to their international banking cartels. So this is where you have the war on terror and radical Islamism that had been cultivated as well at this time, just for this very thing, now begins to pop off after you've put down the communists and socialists and the big boogeymen of the last century, right? And now you've got this unthinkable war on terror that happens post 9/11. And in all of that, you had military generals and deep state operatives, basically military industrial complex operatives, state flat out that they were going to take over a bunch of Middle Eastern countries that were still not yet into their central banking system, the last of which was Iran. And here you have the final story, the final chapter of that endeavor by this nasty satanic military industrial cabal here in America, trying to fetishize their final move in pulling in Iran, likely blowing up Israel is what they would do. Again, the scapegoat, the easy scapegoat. This is why the desolation of abomination happens, guys. This is why you have prophecies of early apostles saying that Rothschilds are going to run back to Israel with all their money, with the whole world in tow, to try and destroy them. Because their game, this whole international banking cartel thing, is going to blow up. And who will they blame? Who will they point the blame at, and who will they go to destroy as a means of digging a pit and throwing us all in there? That's the idea that they're trying to do. That's where I see prophecy all coming together and all of this pointing at the same end. It's happening. So that paragraph spawned me to see the timeline and everything we've experienced in our world wars and the wars that we are threatened with today, our bankers' wars. It's all about central finance. It's all about getting us to go along with the money controllers. That's what the whole Agenda 2030 is all about. If they can get us all to fight each other in war, get us all to destroy ourselves, right? Bombing each other, hating each other. This is exactly what Isaiah saw in the last days, where you'd have brother against brother, generation against generation. And how many people do you see online constantly bringing up contentious issues about, like, oh, the boomers this, or this generation that, or Gen X, Gen Z, or girls, boys, transgender, blah, blah. They have us divided to conquer, clearly. And everybody plays into it because they want clicks, they want the money, they want the attention. They're out there social media influencing and not actually seeing what's happening, that we're being influenced, that they are influencing at the behest of someone else to cause contention, to cause confusion, to cause turmoil, to cause total abandonment of morals, of treating people with kindness. And so I love that our prophet currently now, what is his solution? What is his medicine for all of this secret combination push for contention and division? But unity, but coming together, being a peacemaker, making peace with enemies that you have in your own life. We can't control them. We can't control Mystery Babylon, but we can control ourselves. And that's what we will need to do as everything collapses around us, and all of your neighbors and the people that you follow online that you think are so smart, they do not know what's coming. They don't know. And so when they go crazy, I don't want you to go crazy. I don't want you to abandon your faith because you were looking at the wrong source for the end goal, for what happens next. Sorry, I get emotional. Love your content, Leland. Hey, Celestial Machines. Welcome. Welcome. Okay. Going back. Therefore, if you want to stay in the lucrative king financing business, it's wise to have an enemy or rival waiting in the wings to unseat every king or president to whom you lend. If the king doesn't have an enemy, you must create one. Preeminent in playing this game was the famous House of Rothschild. Its founder, Meyer Amschel Rothschild of Frankfurt, Germany, kept one of his 5 sons at home to run the Frankfurt Bank and sent the others to London, to Paris, to Vienna, and Naples. The Rothschilds became incredibly wealthy during the 19th century by financing governments to fight each other, according to Professor Stuart Crane. And here's a quote from him. He says, "If you look back at every war in Europe during the 19th century, you will see that they always ended with the establishment of a balance of power." I like this. Let's see this again. With every reshuffling, there was a balance of power in a new grouping around the House of Rothschild in England, France, or Austria. They grouped nations so that if any king got out of line, a war would break out, and the war would be decided by which way the financing went. Researching the debt positions of the warring nations will usually indicate who was to be punished. In describing the characteristics of the Rothschilds and other major international bankers, Dr. Quigley tells us that they remained different from ordinary bankers in several ways. They were cosmopolitan and international. They were close to governments, and they were particularly concerned with government debts, including foreign government debts. These bankers came to be called international bankers. And that's from Quigley in Tragedy and Hope, one who associated with them, Quigley was allowed to see their record books, hidden ones, secret ones that we don't know about, and that if you ask somebody today, they would deny that they exist, but they do. One major reason for the historical blackout on the role of the international bankers in political history is that the Rothschilds were Jewish. Anti-Semites had played into the hands of the conspiracy by trying to portray the entire conspiracy as Jewish. And that's what I was talking about before. Nothing could be further from the truth. The traditionally Anglo-Saxon J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller international banking institutions have played a key role in the conspiracy as well. But there is no denying the importance of the Rothschilds and their satellites. However, it is just as unreasonable and immoral to blame all Jews for the crimes of the Rothschilds as it is to hold all Baptists accountable for the crimes of the Rockefellers. The Jewish members of the conspiracy have used an organization called the Anti-Defamation League. And we have AIPAC today that everybody's talking about, the Israel PAC, right? That is lobbying our, like we have dual citizenship amongst so many senators and Congress. I do not agree with that. That should not be happening. I love Israel. I am all about gathering of Israel. I'm all about the Lord's covenant people. But in terms of American government, we should not have senators and representatives of our people who hold the seat of power and sovereignty here in our nation beholden or doing the bidding for some other nation that I know is being used as the scapegoat and the drudge boy for these elite, occult, nasty, satanic bankers. Okay? So it's just like, it is so obvious, but then again, I might get canceled, or I could have maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if I'd have gone out and just started talking like this. But I think now you have so much social buy-in about everybody seeing things going on that we can freely talk about this. It's perfect. We need to. So they use the Anti-Defamation League as an instrument to try and convince everyone that any mention of the Rothschilds or their allies is an attack on all Jews. In this way, they have stifled almost all honest scholarship on international bankers and made the subject taboo within universities. Now, I can hear somebody talking about, I can hear just like in the back of my head, what about the Protocols of Zion, right? And if you know what that is, it's a letter that talks about like some conspiracy amongst the Jews to take over the world. Look into if that's debunked or not, guys. Look into who might have crafted that, who might have been behind scapegoating them with some type of evidence like that. It's not as clear-cut as people want to make it seem when they first pierce the veil of conspiracy thought. Again, you think, oh, there it is. There it is. It's them. It's them. It's not. And any individual or book exploring the subject is immediately attacked by hundreds of ADL committees all over the country. The ADL has never let truth or logic interfere with its highly professional smear jobs. When no evidence is apparent, the ADL, which staunchly opposed so-called McCarthyism, which was finding communists in the government and trying to get the communists out of the government, right? They turned it into McCarthyism, like he was being an alarmist. He was a senator and he was trying to stop the subversion within our government by this kind of stuff. And they basically vilified everybody that was trying to do that. and called it McCarthyism. Just like they smear the word conspiracy theorist after the death of JFK. That was that literal word, that phrase is a CIA created term to delegitimize any conversation or talk or exploration of these topics. That's exactly what McCarthyism is, or muckraking back in the early 1900s, if you're familiar with that term, when journalism and propaganda was just getting started. Muckrakers was the derogatory term for that kind of thing. They always want to put these scary words and like even today, what is it? Conspiracy theorist. That was one thing that they use still. Right-wing extremist. That's the new buzzword, right? That everything gets thrown into that. Fascist. You're a fascist. You're a Nazi. Everybody calls me a Nazi because I say these things, or I want to talk about truth as it is. It's just this is the way to use language to defang your enemies by changing their definitions and then just gaslighting them. So let me get back to where I was. When no evidence is apparent, the ADL, which staunchly opposed so-called McCarthyism. By the way, McCarthy was right. There were a lot of communists in there, maybe too many he was pointing at. But again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what everybody did with McCarthyism. They're like, oh, it's totally wrong. It's just there was no subversion whatsoever. That's not true. But that's what they want you to believe. Actually, nobody has a right to be angrier at the Rothschild clique than their fellow Jews. The Warburgs, another big family name, would have to probably I want to do a deep dive on it myself, so maybe I include you guys in that. But the Warburgs, part of the Rothschild empire, helped finance Adolf Hitler. There were few, if any, Rothschilds or Warburgs in the Nazi prison camps. They sat out the war in luxurious hotels in Paris or immigrated to the United States or England. As a group, Jews have suffered most at the hands of these power seekers. A Rothschild has much more in common with a Rockefeller than he does with a tailor from Budapest or the Bronx. So what he's saying is, like, the Rothschilds are not Jews like you want to blame them as. They're secularist Satanists like the Rockefellers and everybody else, trying to take the agency and control of all people and all governments in the world. That is satanic. That has nothing to do with being Jewish, being of the covenant. And I know everybody's like, oh, the Talmud, and what about this and that? Yeah, sure. Satan has been seeking to delegitimize the covenant people since their inception, since Adam. So it's no surprise that you would see the smears against God's chosen people, along with the very obvious blessings that they are granted in terms of their positions and powers, their affluence, their understanding of things, their blessings. There were a few blah blah blah. Okay. Since the keystone of the international banking empires has been government bonds, it has been in the interest of these international bankers to encourage government debt. The higher the debt, the more the interest. Think of how much like that debt clock shows you how much money on interest we owe because of our $40 trillion in debt, and it's trillions of dollars, $5 trillion in interest, right? It's crazy. It is insurmountable. It is indescribable. Like it's hard for anybody to fathom how much debt we're in, and it's all been intentional to drive us into the ground here and to face these situations of blowing up our economy like we are today, where everything's so volatile, switching from one president to the next, and you have gas prices fluctuate and food and everything else. And there's so many more elements going to into the nudging or the manipulation of all these things. It's not just one thing you can take out and all of a sudden it's fixed. It's got to be like a razing to the ground, a burning. And that's why I believe the second coming is that type of burning as foretold. We are just like before Noah and the flood, when you had global society of corruption. Post-flood, when there was societal corruption locally or regionally, God could send chosen people out on exoduses to find land or places or promised land that was free of this type of tyranny, so that they could live the laws of God and establish righteous, God-fearing, and honest agents. Well, now in a global society, God doesn't have a lot of room anymore to send people off on an exodus to another land to set up something new that is outside of the control of these tyrants. It's global, and it's suffocating. But the church and the restoration has been the seed, the exit plan to escape the pit that has been dug for us. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So where did I leave off here? The neighbor, higher the debt, more the interest. Nothing drives government deeply into debt like war. And it has not been an uncommon practice among international bankers to finance both sides of the bloodiest military conflicts. For example, During our Civil War, the North was financed by the Rothschilds through their American agent, August Belmont, another name to remember, and the American South through the Erlangers, Rothschild relatives. But while wars and revolutions have been useful to international bankers in gaining or increasing control over governments, the key to such control has always been control of money. If you can control government, you can control a government if you have it in your debt. A creditor is in a position to demand the privileges of monopoly from their sovereign. Money-seeking governments have granted monopolies in state banking, natural resources, oil concessions, and transportation. However, the monopoly which the international financiers most covet is control over a nation's money. Eventually, these international bankers actually owned, as private corporations, the central banks of the various European nations. The Bank of England, the Bank of France, the Bank of Germany were not owned by their respective governments, as almost everyone imagines, but they were privately owned monopolies granted by the heads of state, usually in return for loans. Now, under this system, observed Reginald McKenna, president of the Midlands Bank of England, those that create and issue the money and credit direct the policies of government and hold in their hands the destiny of the people. Once the government is in debt to the bankers, it is at their mercy. A frightening example was cited in the London Financial Times of September 26, 1921, which revealed that even at that time, half a dozen men at the top of the big five banks could upset the whole fabric of government finance by refraining from renewing treasury bills. So this is the manipulation, that it doesn't take a whole lot of everybody to be in on it, but you bottleneck the power and how it's distributed throughout everyone by holding those top positions with your guys. That's what this is. That's what I believe we're seeing fighting happening like in geopolitics today, is you have a fight going on internally behind the scenes and now out front. It's spoiled over into the front public. This is why you have freedom to talk about conspiracy theories like we do nowadays. Just within the last 10 years, I would say, since Donald Trump, basically. 2012 was the updated Smith-Mundt Act that allowed the government here to throw propaganda at its own people. And so ever since then, we've been facing illegal propaganda, psychological operations put on us by our own intelligence agencies, right? And now this is happening in the public. And this is why I hate everybody that thinks they understand everything going on about Epstein or Trump or this or that. Like, if you're not acknowledging this underground war that is spilling over between these ancient bankers, and I'm talking like since the inception of our country, right? And that's not ancient, but these old, centuries-old bankers going to head-to-head with our populist movement, a populist movement here in America. And the populist movements all throughout history, last century at least, since these international bankers have had control, the populist movements get squashed. They get misrepresented to everybody else in the world, and they're basically genocided. They're basically killed from within or murdered, or another rival enemy comes in and wipes them off the face of the planet. This is what I believe, like the terror cells that we see, we went in and fought in Iraq, Al-Qaeda to ISIS to whatever. Our intelligence created them to be the boogeymen, to make things happen and manipulate. And then when it's time, they just wipe them off the map. They kill them. That's exactly, it's fodder. It's cannon fodder. So eventually these international bankers actually owned as private corporations the central banks of various nations. I read that. I read all this. All those who have sought dictatorial control over modern nations have understood the necessity of a central bank. When the League of Just Men, that's the group that turned into, I think they were called the Communist League after the League of Just Men. And then they hired, in 1847, hired Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to codify their beliefs. And that's the Communist Manifesto. But in that, there are 10 planks, 10 here, let's just look it up. What are the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto? Does this show them here? Yeah, okay, this will be good. And maybe it's not totally correct because it's AI or whatever, but this is the general idea of it. These were like their articles of faith for the communists. Abolition of property and land and the application of all rents of land to public purposes. So this is getting rid of personal property and throwing it over to the state. The government owns it. Communism, right? Like a commune. Heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. They don't want any of those familial ties because they're coming in with their oligarchy to take all of your old blood money, right? Like, how do you get those old families out but by eliminating those rights of inheritance? Confiscation of the, and they also talk about, like in the Communist Manifesto, if I'm remembering correctly, that it's inheritance that is the one of the driving forces between class differences. Persecutor versus persecuted. It's families that inherit and build wealth like exponentially while everybody else in the lower classes struggle and they've got to take over. Like it's this class warfare constantly, and all these points are to like fight that, to get rid of that. That's what these are meant, like they're argued as in the Communist Manifesto. So confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with a state capital and exclusive monopoly. So here you have exactly what they're talking about in terms of central banking in each nation they want to control with communism is a necessity. It has to happen. It has to be there. So that's what he's talking about when he's talking about one of their, this is the pillar 5 that he said, number 5. So talking about setting up a bank. I'll read the rest of these and then we'll go back. But here are the other pillars or planks. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. So monopolization of how we communicate, what we can say to each other. So freedom of speech, basically, and freedom of mobility, of transportation, where we can go and who not. This is why you have in communist nations, like you need your papers to go anywhere and you can't, and on certain days you're here or there. Like they want control over everything. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Improvement of the soil in accordance with a common plan. So again, even agriculture and industrial things, they monopolize or seek to monopolize to make sure that you don't have these industrialists who get more money than your government to challenge them or, to compete. Equal liability to all labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of distinction between town and country. So again, they're just trying to blur all the lines between your line, my line, to be our line, community, right? And then free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. I would also throw in there that one of the things they do argue for is the abolition of the family as a unit. Like when you're talking about inheritance and stuff like this, this is part of that, but it's more explicit in their manifesto that their desire is to destroy the nuclear family, right? The family of where the parents have responsibility to teach and inform their children. They want that responsibility. They want it free education for all children, right? Because they want to dictate what that education is. That's basically what our public education has turned into, is like a communist vector to feed us socialist communist ideas. And that's why you have so many retarded kids coming out of school these days that are literally retarded. Like they're slow in their American awakening of freedom, of sovereignty, and of the Constitution. They don't understand it. Unless they have parents like mine who did a great job of teaching me to honor and understand and learn about the Constitution, or a religious institution that does the same, which is ours. We love the Constitution. We teach about it all the time. The prophet I was born into, Jeff Benson, was all about the Constitution. So it's like, if we would open our eyes. Okay, so there are your 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. That's what he's referencing here when he's talking about point 5. So let's get back. The 5th plank, yeah. So this is it. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. Lenin later stated that the establishment of a central bank was 90% of communizing a country. Such conspirators knew that you cannot take control of a nation without military force unless that nation has a central bank through which you can control its economy. So that's important right there. These guys knew you can't take control of a nation without military force unless that nation has a central bank through which you can control its economy. The anarchist Bakunin sarcastically remarked about the followers of Karl Marx. They have one foot in the bank and one foot in the socialist movement. So it's like, they're doing the bidding of the banks, which is a moral contradiction, basically, to what socialism should be. The international financiers set up their own front man, where the socialist is like the rich and the poor, like the rich give their money to the poor. That's not what's going on in the Communist Manifesto and what Karl Marx and them laid out for this League of Just Men and the Communist League. And the Fabian Society is essentially what goes in covertly to subvert all of these organizations through Fabian means. This is what it turns into. So the international financiers set up their own front man in charge of each of Europe's central banks. Professor Quigley reports, it must not be felt that these heads of the world's chief central banks were themselves substantive powers in world finance. So he's like, don't think these guys made themselves their figureheads. They're cardboard cutouts. I would say Elon Musk is, Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, these types of techno bro idols are cardboard cutouts, I would argue. And I know there's a lot of support for that in the alternative conspiracy world, that you want to look into that in terms of like, these guys were handed technologies and they're a cardboard cutout, a face to add a veneer of legitimacy to the freedoms everyone thinks they have. They were not. So these people, they were not the heads of these banks and powers of world finance. They weren't. Rather, they were the technicians and agents of the dominant investment bankers of their own countries, who had raised them up and were perfectly capable of throwing them down. The substantive financial powers of the world were in the hands of these investment bankers, also called international or merchant bankers, who remained largely behind the scenes in their own unincorporated private banks. These formed a system of international cooperation and national dominance, which was more private, more powerful, and more secret than that of their agents in the central banks. Dr. Quigley also reveals that the international bankers who owned and controlled the banks of England and France maintained their power even after those banks were theoretically socialized. Naturally, those who controlled the central banks of Europe were eager from the start to fasten a similar establishment on the United States. So again, all these central banks going up in Germany and France and England, they wanted to get one in America. In fact, you can look back into the Civil War, and it was all about central bank. In fact, there's the whole 1900s, the industrial era, the Industrial Revolution to our robber baron era, and this is my section on the robber barons that we'll build out. But these are the three big monopoly guys. You have Rockefeller, who we've talked about. You have Carnegie, J.P. Morgan. So these are our three. And in the book, The President Makers, these are some of the focus characters in that book and things like that. So these guys, they purchase the press, they purchase education, they are investing in the railroad, our transportation, all these things the Communist Manifesto puts out that that need to be controlled. These are the guys with the money and the industry and the dishonesty to hatch these plans and take over these institutions and subvert them, or at least have agents or pay agents or create the finance to fund that type of subversion. But what I was getting at is that in this era of the Restoration, you had in Joseph Smith's day, look, and where's the martyrdom is 1844, Joseph Smith, right? But from 1863, you had the National Bank Act. You have, going back further than this. So go back, you had many attempts to put a central bank into America even before Joseph Smith's martyrdom and the Civil War and things like that. You had a first Bank of the United States, a second bank. You had a free banking era. This is during Joseph Smith's day when he's advocating and running for presidency on these certain banking ideas and things like that that would be in harmony with our Constitution and the sovereignty, but not so much a benefit to these international conspirators. So that's where you have this element, this most important element of the subversion of our nation is, I would say, directly related to the assassination and martyrdom of Joseph Smith and his run for presidency and the issues he was bringing up about these very things, and not just the banking part of it, but the moral, social, and all these other aspects, the educational aspects that communism wanted to put forward, were very threatened by the things Joseph Smith was talking about. And there were enough members of the church that there could be problems in terms of politics if he were allowed to run, and all the Mormon votes might turn things sour for this international banking cartel, the communists seeking to take over. But all I'm saying is, like, during the 1800s and even back during the 1800s, you had banking crisis and panics this whole time. And I would argue that Civil War was fought over a lot of these same principles about financing and instituting a central bank, that it's more prevalent than just the slave question, even though that's what we focus on when we learn about the Civil War and stuff in history, Emancipation Proclamation, this and that. But there were central banking tenets as well to the Civil War that go understated. And then you have the Federal Reserve finally put into place. So the central bank finally works in 1913. They finally get through and punch it through 140 years after our inception, right? So it took them 150 years, but they finally got the central bank. And then right away, they take us to war. Right away, they institute foreign policy, an organization that subverts our foreign policy, which is the CFR. This is what Ezra Taft Benson pointed to. This is what under call conspiracy is going to tell us is the mechanism for policy making of these international bankers. They are the CFR. And the CFR, once you follow its traces and legs and spider webs, it shatters into 100 different sub-organizations and think tanks and things like that. And so the trail of tracing these things back is not so straightforward and simple. But the underlying ideas that these groups are pushing upon the nations are. And so if you understand the fundamental battle between like communism or secularism, Satanism, it's agency. taking away the sovereignty. Anything against the inspired Constitution of America is going to be negative. It's going to be satanic. It's going to be the part of this one world, new world order. So it's easy to see it if you want to break it down to that binary. But when you're wanting to say like, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, who was manipulated, who is that, it's very much murky. And that's where a lot of speculation might come in, though there's a lot of evidence to say, no, this guy was a bad guy. This guy was a good guy. Look what this guy did. And you can tell by their actions, their fruits, you start to see what kind of tree they're from, right? But this is like the breaking point. This is when we get thrown into submission, and then our military is used as the cudgel to go throughout the world, putting the rest of the nations into central banking, into the same international organization of criminality, right? And so that's basically where we're at, and what the fight is right now here with all this stuff about to blow up. Yeah, I mean, okay. I just like the map. I like to go back and make sure we place ourselves on that. But it was to point out that this idea of trying to put a central bank here in America is not like a new idea that just popped up with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, but that they've been trying to do that up until that point. They finally just codified it in their manifesto and then formally went about subverting it in a more systematic method through their Fabian societies and things like that, and just murder and conspiracy. So, I was up here. Okay. So from the earliest days, the founding fathers had been conscious of attempts to control America through money manipulation, and they carried on a running battle with the international bankers. Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams, "I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies." Yeah, that's an understatement. But even though America did not have a central bank after President Jackson abolished it in 1836, the European financiers and their American agents managed to obtain a great deal of control over our monetary system. Gustav Myers, in The History of the Great American Fortunes, a book, reveals, under the surface, the Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were powers in the old Bank of the United States, abolished by Andrew Jackson. This makes me think of the statements by Joseph Smith when he's praising Andrew Jackson as like, we're at the peak of America right now, because Andrew Jackson did go against them, although Andrew Jackson did some other things to kind of screw up the country in other ways. But I see this conversation. Joseph Smith had a lot to say about Andrew Jackson. Read his propaganda out, his campaign marketing materials. I don't know what they're called. Like, it's like what would they call it back in the day? Now we would say like send you a text or an email that you would get a flyer. That's kind of what it was. It was like a little mini read that you would go around passing out or reading to people at congregations back in those days. And he talks about Andrew Jackson, about this kind of stuff. During the 19th century, the leading financiers of the metropolitan East often cut one another's financial throats, but their Western and rural victims started to organize politically. The robber barons saw that they had a community of interest toward which they must work together to protect themselves from thousands of irate farmers, up-and-coming competitors. And I would say the Latter-day Saints were part of this group that you're throwing in here right here. This would be the rural victims who are organizing politically against the robber barons and all those who are seeking to exercise unrighteous dominion beyond the Constitution on other Americans. It's exactly what Joseph Smith was going to the president of the United States to barter and talk about and be like, hey, what are you going to do for us? Like, what? They're literally breaking the Constitution. You're the executive. What are you going to do? And they're like, oh, sorry, I can't do anything for you. That's Martin Van Buren. It's like, sorry, it'd be not very politically expedient for me to help you, Brother Joseph, but I like you guys. That's kind of how it went. This diffusion of economic power was one of the main factors stimulating the demands for a central bank by would-be business and financial monopolists. In Years of Plunder, another book you could write if you want. I haven't read it, but there's another one. Proctor Hansel writes of this era, among the Morgans, that's J.P. Morgan, the Kuhn-Loebs, and others, which the Kuhn-Loeb is going to play a huge role in setting up the CIA, Alan Dulles, and all of the stuff post-World War II that goes on with, well, no, maybe I'm getting them mixed up. I think Kuhn-Loeb they were a law firm well before that, and yep, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'll stop. I need to do a little more research on Kuhn-Loeb, but I know they're a firm or something. Okay, the others, and so the Morgans, the Kuhn-Loebs, and others similar pillars of the industrial order, there was less disposition to become involved in disagreements that led to financial dislocation. A community of interest came into being with results that were highly beneficial. So instead of being enemies and at each other's throats economically, they started to collaborate. against the Übermenschen. But aside from the major Eastern centers, most American bankers and their customers still distrusted the whole concept. In order to show the hinterlands that they were going to need a central banking system, the international bankers created a series of panics as a demonstration of their power, a warning of what could happen unless the rest of the bankers got into line. The man in charge of conducting these lessons was J. Pierpont Morgan. American-born but educated in England and Germany. This reminds me too. It just hit me as I was reading this. You have Adam Weishaupt, who's basically started the Order of the Illuminati back in the, before the founding of our nation. Here he is. And he's from Bavaria, or the Bavarian Illuminati is what it's called. But this is essentially Germany, okay? So you're talking about Germany, this whole area right here. No, Frankfurt. Where does Rothschild come out of? Right? Here's Amschel Rothschild and his 5 sons. And he's in Frankfurt, right here in Germany. Right in the same area as Bavaria, basically. And he's coming out of it with the same concept, same ideas, same impetus. It's just very, very curious now that I see it this way. What I'm looking at, this is the benefit of having or putting the map like this is what I'm seeing. So you're talking about, you want to know the Illuminati get disbanded and they kind of go underground, and a lot of people say that they turn into the League of Just Men, basically, and the League of Just Men into the Fabian Society. That's kind of the evolution of this. And so in between, who do you have pop up as one of the modern international banking cartel leaders? But Rothschild, coming from the same general geographic area as Bavaria here. Very interesting. I don't know if I can prove that, there's some connection there. Maybe there is and I'm unaware of, or you guys know of one. But that's something I definitely want to look into. Just hit me as I was reading this here. So, but aside from the major Eastern centers, most American bankers, blah, blah, they distrusted the whole concept. Okay, I read this whole paragraph. Good job. The man in charge of conducting these was J.P. Morgan. So he's American-born, educated in England and Germany. Morgan is referred to by many, including Congressman Louis McFadden, a banker, who for 10 years headed the House Banking and Currency Committee, as the top American agent of the English Rothschilds. Okay, so J.P. Morgan, who's, again, one of the prime robber barons of America's Industrial Revolution, right, J.P. Morgan. And he's essentially a Rothschild protege. I don't know where I have my Rothschilds. Where'd you go? Oh, up here. Okay, so that's what we're seeing the connection. So he is the top American agent of the English Rothschilds, is J.P. Morgan. So he does these exercise where he's like, no, you're going to see how important it is to have a central bank because we're going to manipulate the banks and cause some panics for you. And that's exactly what they did. By the turn of the century, J.P. Morgan was already an old hand at creating artificial panics. Such affairs were well coordinated. Senator Robert Owen, a co-author of the Federal Reserve Act, who later deeply regretted his role, testified before a congressional committee that the bank he owned received from the National Bankers Association what came to be known as the Panic Circular of 1893. It stated, "You will at once retire 1/3 of your circulation and call in 1/2 of your loans." Historian Frederick Lewis Allen tells in Life magazine of April 25th, 1949, of Morgan's role in spreading rumors about the insolvency of the Knickerbocker Bank and the Trust Company of America, which rumors triggered the 1907 panic. In answers to the question, did Morgan precipitate the panic? Allen reports, Oakley Thorne, the president of that particular trust company, testified later before a congressional committee that his bank had been subjected to only moderate withdrawals, that he had not applied for help, and that it was the Morgans' sore point statement alone that had caused the run on his bank. So when put under oath and before Congress, this president of the trust company, the Trust Company of America, that J.P. Morgan was saying was going insolvent or going under, he says, no, we had moderate withdrawals, and it was Morgan's statement alone that caused the bank run. So from his testimony, this testimony, plus the disciplinary measures taken by the clearinghouse against the Heinz, Morse, and Thomas banks, plus other fragments of supposedly pertinent evidence, certain chroniclers have arrived at the ingenious conclusion that the Morgan interest took advantage of the unsettled conditions during the autumn of 1907 to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed so that it would kill off rival banks and consolidate the preeminence of the banks within the Morgan orbit. The panic which Morgan had created, he proceeded to end almost single-handedly. He had made his point. Frederick Allen explains, the lesson of the panic of 1907 was clear, though not for some 6 years was it destined to be embodied in legislation, the Federal Reserve Act. The United States gravely needed a central banking system. The man who was to play the most significant part in providing America with the central bank was Paul Warburg, who, along with his brother Felix, had immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1902. See chart 4. So here's Paul Warburg. I'm just going to look at this for a second, kind of digest it. So here's his brother Max, and they're the ones that meet at Jekyll Island. Okay, so we have this big Jekyll Island meeting where this conspiracy basically takes shape and form and has solid game plan put to it. Oh wait, no, Max Warburg is his dad or son. I don't remember. Felix is his brother. That's what he says. His brother Felix had immigrated. Okay, and Colonel House, who's basically the British handler. He's British intelligence, right? The Empire's intelligence. Colonel House of Woodrow Wilson, who after the Federal Reserve is instituted, Woodrow Wilson's the one who campaigned on we're not going to go to war. He said, we're not going to war. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. And then as soon as he got in, Colonel House and the Empire says, nope, you got to go to war with these Germans. They're crazy. And that's when, if you watch my Watchmen episode from last year with Chris Hardman, we talked about propaganda and its history and how Colonel House and propaganda really took off during this period once the financial central bank was in its place. Well, then it was free game for these Fabians and the communists and the socialists to like hit us with every other angle, from education to science to this and that. And this is when you have it all really start to take shape and form and restrict and suffocate our nation, our freedoms. So yeah, Felix Warburg looks like he's married to Nina Loeb. All right, okay, so here's Kuhn, Loeb and Company. So this is the law firm and everything that handles. Actually, I'm going to look this up because I feel stupid that I don't like, this doesn't rattle off my tongue. I've heard this name so many times. Kuhn, Loeb. What is it? Kuhn, Loeb and Co. And maybe we do a chat GPT to have it just kind of give us a rundown, but okay, multinational investment bank. See, I thought they were a law firm, but they're one of the investment banks. I'm going to read it. Kuhn, Loeb & Co. was an American multinational investment bank founded in 1867 by Abraham Kuhn and his brother-in-law Solomon Loeb, headed from 1885 onwards by Jacob Schiff, Loeb's son-in-law. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here. Jacob Schiff, Frieda Schiff. Okay, so yeah, Paul Warburg working with these guys, and his brother, who has influence with Colonel House, who's influencing the president or the future president, right? So that's kind of how this is all going down. Yeah, Paul Warburg looks like he's the fountainhead for it. So Paul Warburg married Nina Loeb, the daughter of Solomon Loeb of Cume. I'm reading this again for my own sake. And Company, America's most powerful international banking firm. Brother Felix married Frieda Schiff, daughter of Jacob Schiff, the ruling power behind Kuhn Loeb. Stephen Birmingham writes, so it's like an incestuous relationship, basically. Stephen Birmingham writes in his authoritative Our Crowd, in the 18th century, the Schiffs and the Rothschilds shared a double house in Frankfurt. Schiff reportedly bought his partnership in Loon Cobe with Rothschild money. So again, this is, we talked about it earlier, like if you have, when you're financing kings and governments, like how do you get collateral? You have a stake in the company or in the whatever it is to dictate things going forward. Another way to do this is through marriage. So you have a wife who's in, like, for example, how it happens today is you have a wife that might be in the Department of Justice and the husband who works in the Senate. And so you have the ability to collude, conspire, and conspire from within your own family, basically. Like you intermarry to secure these types of conspiracies, these relationships. So it's just more elements of complexity to what's going on here. The ruling power behind Loon Code, blah, 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 blah. Stephen Birmingham writes in his authoritative Our Crowd, in the 18th century, the Schiffs and the Rothschilds shared a double house in Frankfurt. Schiff reportedly bought his partnership with Kuhn Loeb and Rothschild money. Both Paul and Felix Warburg became partners in Kuhn Loeb and Company. In 1907, the year of the Morgan precipitated panic, Paul Warburg began spending almost all of his time writing and lecturing on the need for a bank reform. Kuhn Loeb and Company was sufficiently public-spirited about the matter to keep him on salary at $500,000 per year, while for the next, oh my gosh, I just am curious. We're going to see how much that is today. How much would 500K be in, how much would 500K from 1907 be worth today? No, that's not, it's going to confuse it. It's going to try and convert it. Let's say, what would be the equivalent? What would be the equivalent to 500K in 1907 today. That's how I'd word it. All right. So let's get a little math in. So to calculate this, we use the consumer price index, other inflation measures, blah, blah, blah. Calculation notes the average inflation rate. Who cares? Just give me the total. There you go. So, oh my gosh, millions of dollars per year. I mean, depending on what you want. That's crazy. $500,000 in 1907 is how much this guy was getting paid. For the next 6 years, he donated his time to the public good. Right? And he's the guy out there pushing the bank reform to try and get this pushed through. So, I mean, it pays off for him because in 1913, they get it. Working with Warburg in promoting his banking reform was Nelson Aldrich, known as Morgan's floor broker in the Senate. Aldrich's daughter, Abby, married John D. Rockefeller Jr. The current governor of New York is named for his maternal grandfather. Okay, so Warburg. We need Aldrich, Nelson Aldrich. I'm going to highlight these because I'm going to go back through after we finish the chapter and map all these guys out on our big map. Peter Schiff or Jacob Schiff. Stephen Birmingham. No, that's an author. Nina Loeb. I think I'll get the point once I come back and visit these, but I'll find them all. I usually do. Okay. After the Panic of 1907, Aldrich was appointed by the Senate to head the National Monetary Commission. Although he had no technical knowledge of banking, Aldrich and his entourage spent nearly 2 years and $300,000 of the taxpayers' money being wined and dined by the owners of Europe's central banks as they toured the continent studying central banking. When the commission returned from its luxurious junket, it held no meetings and made no report for nearly 2 years. But Senator Aldrich was busy arranging things. Together with Paul Warburg and other international bankers, he staged one of the most important secret meetings in the history of the United States. Rockefeller agent Frank Vanderlip admitted many years later in his memoirs, "Despite my views about the value of society and greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System." So you have Frank Vanderlip admitting that they conspired at Jekyll Island for what would become the Federal Reserve. The secrecy was well warranted. Brave browser, another man of culture, I see. Yep, Brave browser. I have to use this PC is so old though that I have to kind of mix and match. If I want to play YouTube videos, I got to pull up an old Chrome one because it acts funny. My GPU needs an update. My whole system needs an update. Let's see. So at Jekyll Island, no, I'll say it here. The secrecy was well warranted. At stake was control over the entire economy. Senator Aldrich had issued confidential invitations to Henry P. Davison of J.P. Morgan and Company, Vanderlip, president of the Rockefeller-owned National City Bank, Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Benjamin Strong of Morgan's Bankers Trust Company, and Paul Warburg. They were all to accompany him to Jekyll Island, Georgia, to write the final recommendations of the National Monetary Commission report. Right. At Jekyll Island, writes B.C. Forbes in his Men Who Are Making America, after a general discussion, it was decided to draw up certain broad principles on which all could agree. Every member of the group voted for a central bank as being the ideal cornerstone for any banking system. Warburg stressed that the name central bank must be avoided at all costs. It was decided to promote the scheme as a regional reserve system with 4, later 12, branches in different sections of the government. That's why every time you hear somebody go on a diatribe about like, oh, the Federal Reserve, it is neither federal nor a reserve. Like, that's exactly what they're talking about. Like, he's like, we can't call it a central bank because they won't accept it. They don't like a central bank, so we got to call it something tricky. And now we say, oh, the Federal Reserve is a central bank, and people are like, what? They don't know. So it's again, language as a trick to gaslight and conspire and fool and trick people. So Warburg's like, we can't do that. It was decided to promote the scheme as a regional reserve system with 4, later 12, branches in different sections of the country. So like, no, it's regional. It's spread out. It's not a central bank. The conspirators knew that the New York bank would dominate the rest, which would be marble white elephants to deceive the public. So we're talking about. So like, we'll pretend like it's regional, but everything's being run out of New York. Out of the Jekyll Island meeting came the completion of the Monetary Commission report and the Aldrich Bill. Right, that's important. Warburg had proposed the bill to be designated the Federal Reserve System, But Aldrich insisted his own name was already associated with the public's mind with banking reform and that it would arouse suspicion if a bill were introduced which did not bear his name. However, Aldrich's name attached to the bill proved to be the kiss of death, since any law bearing his name was so obviously a project of the international bankers. When the Aldrich bill could not be pushed through Congress, a new strategy had to be devised. So everybody was like, no, we're not accepting your bill, Aldrich. We know you're a crook. It's like, crap, we can't put my name on it either. When the Aldrich bill could not be pushed through the Congress, a strategy had to be devised. The Republican Party was too closely connected with Wall Street, which was set up by Aaron Burr, by the way, who was a British agent, assassinated. Anyways, okay. The Republican Party was too closely connected with Wall Street. The only hope for a central bank was to disguise it and have it put through by the Democrats as a measure to strip Wall Street of its power. The opportunity to do this came with the approach of the 1912 presidential election. Republican President William Howard Taft, who had turned against the Aldrich bill, seemed as a surefire bet for re-election until Taft's predecessor, fellow Republican Teddy Roosevelt, agreed to run on the ticket of the Progressive Party. So, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt is not the awesome patriot that I was told he was growing up in a propagandized education system. I think he did a lot of good things for conservation, maybe, but in a lot of those moves, he was doing things at the behest of these international bankers in locking up land for the government that they could use to pillage and benefit and basically to limit the growth and the growth of the hinterlands, like they were saying, of the rural folk, of the lessers. Okay. So Teddy Roosevelt agreed to run on the ticket of the Progressive Party. So he splits the vote. Teddy Roosevelt comes in, splits the vote from Howard Taft, and guess who gets in? It's So in America's 60 Families, Ferdinand Lundberg acknowledges, as soon as Roosevelt signified that he would again challenge Taft, the president's defeat was inevitable. Throughout the three-cornered fight, Taft, Roosevelt, Wilson, Roosevelt had Morgan agents Frank Munsey and George Perkins constantly at his heels, supplying money, going over his speeches, bringing people from Wall Street in to help, and in general, carrying the entire burden of the campaign against Taft. So you had basically Roosevelt and Wilson aligned against Taft. Perkins, and this happens today. This is every candidate you've seen going in. This is why Donald Trump caused such a big stir, is because he seemed like he really was an outsider coming in that was not part of this international banking club per se. So this is why you had such a big distortion in the hypnotism of the smoke and mirrors put on by the carnies. So in short, most of Roosevelt's campaign, Perkins and J.P. Morgan and Company were the substance of the Progressive Party. Everything else was trimming. In short, most of Roosevelt's campaign fund was supplied by the two Morgan hatchet men who were seeking Taft's scalp. The Democrat candidate, Woodrow Wilson, was equally the property of Morgan. Dr. Gabriel Kolko, in his Triumph of Conservatism, another book, reports, in the late 1907, he, Wilson, supported the Aldrich Bill on banking and was full of praise for Morgan's role in American society. According to Lundberg, for nearly 20 years before his nomination, Woodrow Wilson had moved in the shadow of Wall Street. So he was already being groomed by Wall Street and these international bankers. Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, and this book, The President Makers, has a huge section on Wilson and how he's basically, I would say he's like Obama today, where Obama was an intelligence asset created from the beginning to become a community organizer, a political activist after the ilk and form of Saul Alinsky, right? Rules for Radicals, super communist subversive, a Fabian Society elite, right? That's what Obama was. He was curated from the crib or test tube or whatever, to become this Manchurian candidate, a owned puppet, a cutout. And a lot of Wilson, I see, follows the same patterns, coming up and being educated by these people and wined and dined and then told exactly what to do and what he would do. So the banking reform movement had neatly isolated itself from Kenya to D.C., our beloved Obama. That's right, Dustin. Okay. The Democrat candidate, Woodrow Wilson, was equally the property of J.P. Morgan. Okay, I read that. Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt proceeded to whistle-stop the country, trying to outdo each other in florid and hypocritical denunciations of the Wall Street Money Trust, the same group of insiders which was financing the campaigns of both. So they were like, we're going to get those bankers, we're going to get those Wall Street guys, and they were being paid by them. It happens today too. Everybody's doing the same thing. All your candidates today are doing the same thing. Dr. Kolkel goes on to tell us that at the beginning of 1912, banking reform seemed a dead issue. The banking reform movement had neatly isolated itself. Wilson resurrected the issue and promised the country a money system free from domination by the international bankers of Wall Street. Moreover, the Democrat platform expressly stated, we are opposed to the Aldrich plan for a central bank. But the big boys knew they had it bought. Among the international financiers who contributed heavily to the Wilson campaign, in addition to those already named, were Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, Henry Morgenthau, Thomas Fortune Ryan, and the New York Times publisher Adolph Ox. The insider's sheepdog, who controlled Wilson and guided the program through Congress, was the mysterious Colonel Edward Mandell House, the British-educated son of a representative of England's financial interests in the American South. This is what I'm talking about. He's the empire's handler for Wilson, who gets us into World War I, who gets the CFR in through. Like, this is the guy. And so this is what I'm saying. Like, you can see these types of handlers, or what they're called. You're sent in, you get buddy with something, you've got a lot of resources, you get them under your control somehow, into your confidence, and then you nudge them according to whoever you're an agent or servant for. And this is exactly what Edward Mandell House does. The title was honorary colonel. House had never served in the military. He was strictly a behind-the-scenes wire puller and is regarded by many historians as the real president of the United States during the Wilson years. House authored a book, Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he wrote of establishing socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx as steps toward his goal. House, both in his book and in real life, called for passage of a graduated income tax and central bank providing a flexible, inflatable paper currency. The graduated income tax and a central bank were two of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, as we just read, right? So here you have Edward Mandell House, basically, who's running the presidency during Wilson's time, a student and advocate for socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx. So he's basically a League of the Just Men, Fabian socialist. In The Intimate Papers of Colonel House, another book, Professor Charles Seymour refers to the colonel as the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve Act. Seymour's work contains numerous documents and records showing constant contact between House and Paul Warburg while the Federal Reserve Act was being prepared and steered through Congress. Biographer George Virek assures us that the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Kahns, the Rockefellers, the Morgans put their faith in House, Edward Mandell House. Their faith was amply rewarded. Dustin says, aside from banking and war, Woodrow Wilson gave us direct primaries, referendums 16th and 17th. Yes. Okay, so it's like, there's so much. And again, I'm not doing a great job of being totally inclusive of everything that's going on. I think I'm just painting a general picture as laid out by the book here. And I encourage everybody, you need to study this stuff on your own. Don't just take what I'm doing here or the 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever you listen to me doing this stuff and think that you know things. You need to read this for yourself. I've read this book like several times, I'm telling you, and I'm still learning things. I still don't know these names. I still don't have it on memory recall like I probably should. And I'd like to. That's a goal. Like, I love this stuff. I want to understand history and know things because you learn from it, or we're destined to repeat the same mistakes. And we're doing it right now. Everybody's repeating the same mistakes if we would have learned from this last 100 years. But we're not. We have a lot of external distractions that weren't there 100 years ago either, with internet and social media and just the general matrix that we've been placed into by the technocrats. So it's different, and I understand. And so I'm not as angry as I used to be maybe when I first pierced the veil myself, and it was like, why doesn't anybody know this stuff? And get mad at everybody. You start to chill out the more you understand how downtrodden and how disadvantaged we all are because of these kinds of people and the slow, methodical, machine-like work that they've been doing for hundreds of years to subvert us, to get us to this point where we don't know up from down or left from right or man from woman. PhD in history, propaganda plus more direct voting, how influence has. Yes, that's probably one of your PhDs, right, Dustin? Was in history? I know it. In order to support the fiction that the Federal Reserve Act was a people's bill, the insider financiers put up a smokescreen of opposition to it. again, a smokescreen of opposition to it. Does that apply today with all kinds of stuff going on? Like, who says they oppose things when they probably don't, or it was strictly a case of Briar Rabbit begging not to be thrown into the briar patch. Both Aldridge and Vanderlip denounced what in actuality was their own bill. Nearly 25 years later, Frank Vanderlip admitted. Now, although the Aldrich Federal Reserve Plan was defeated when it bore the name Aldrich, nevertheless, its essential points were all contained in the plan that finally was adopted. They just changed the name. Taking advantage of Congress's desire to adjourn for Christmas, again, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on December 22nd, 1913 by a vote of 298 to 60 in the House, and in the Senate by a majority of 43 to 25. Wilson had fulfilled the insider's pledge he had made in order to become president. So he promised them he would get this to pass, they would make him president, basically. Warburg told House, well, it hasn't got quite everything we want, but the lack can be adjusted later by administrative process. Okay? This is them saying, oh, we'll just subvert and change it later. Doesn't have to be right now. Maybe in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 20. It doesn't matter. We'll get it. That's the Fabian creep. That's the long vision that these people have when conspiring and making plans. There was genuine opposition to the act, but it could not match the power of the bill's advocates. Conservative Harry Cabot Lodge Sr. proclaimed with great foresight, the bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to a vast inflation of currency. I do not like to think that any law can be passed which will make it possible to submerge the gold standard in a flood of irredeemable paper currency. After the vote, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous aviator, I didn't know there was a famous aviator named Lindbergh, but there you go, told Congress, this act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. So it's just codifying the international financiers into a position of authority within our government. That's kind of what 1913 is. When you look at the Federal Reserve Act, when you look at the central bank, when you look at these things, that's what you have to consider. That this is the moment that they set their foundation deep within our government, our administrative government. This is the Aldrich Bill in disguise. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. The Federal Reserve Act was, and still is, hailed as a victory of democracy over the money trust. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is what gets me. This is why it's so funny and why a lot of people I follow that are economics guys, finance guys, love Donald Trump because of the way he plays this game with the Federal Reserve. He speaks about it knowing exactly, like, he understands that it's as corrupt as it is. And he says things about the central bank like, well, why aren't they raising rates right now? Why aren't they lowering rates right now? Why aren't they doing this? Because he knows that they're intentionally not doing these things to cause inflation, which will in turn make a political candidate that they don't approve of look bad or things like that. And so he knows the game being played and he plays in their battle space. He doesn't come out there and try and say like, nah, they're all fake and gay. Like he does that with the media, right? He said that with the media. And now he's starting to do that with certain other intelligence propaganda efforts, right? The Russia collusion hoax, the impeachment hoax, whatever it is, the Epstein thing, whatever's going on, there's some type of confusion and embroilment going on that he's pointing at and saying, nope, this is not right. And he does that with such frequency to Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve and threatens them with all kinds of things. Like you have, who's his hatchet man? His financial guy. He's a Jewish guy. What's his name? His name escapes me. One of the guys right now in the administration working this tariff plan for Donald Trump threatened, basically saying like, yeah, Jerome Powell, the leader of the Fed, he's slated to retire or leave his office at the beginning of next year. And they're not going to play with what the president says. Like if the president says like, you guys need to shut it down and do it, like they'll just not do it. Like they're independent, they're unauditable. Like something has to happen for this to be rooted out of our government more than just like, we can't talk to everybody about how bad it is. Like something's got to happen. So he's playing in the space that they're providing by like pointing to the obvious that, hey, these things are happening right now. Why isn't the Federal Reserve doing this? Why isn't he doing it? So he continues to point the people like a laser pointer to, hey, why don't you ask questions about this stuff? Why don't you ask questions about this stuff? He's done that throughout his presidency about all this international conspiracy stuff where he's pointing at these things and like, I don't know. Why don't we look at this? Or he'll say something that gets everybody in an uproar so that everybody's talking about it. And then things happen. And oh, lo and behold, it's like he had some plan or a solution, problem, reaction, solution, just like the enemies. He's got his own things. And so you have these two factions now on the international stage messing the game board that has been set up and established for 200 years. Now somebody's like trying to pull it and move it. And so you're seeing them come out of character and start to fight each other openly, not just behind the scenes. That's what I think the last 8 years plus have been, a demonstration of this. And when we talk about Ezra Ziegel and these presidents now in these latter days being an opposite side of the wing and having a different character than everybody else, CFR in line before them, where now you have guys that are kind of coming in there and mucking things up for the international bankers, these sleeping heads behind the scenes, right? The empire behind the scenes is not happy with how things are starting to shake up because their plans have been fractured, gap stopped. And so they're having to come up with all kinds of alternative plans and things to muddle the space. And that's where you have this confusion popping, where nobody knows what to believe or what's going on or who's who or who's what. But clearly you have factions within this secret club of who knows how how the sausage is made. They're starting to fight openly. And it makes me so dejected. I'm sad when I see Latter-day Saints and people who engage with what's going on the superficial level, on the political soap opera level, on the drama level that they are providing for you to react emotionally to, left or right or here to there or this or that. It's like, guys, ground yourself in what is happening right now. That this hundreds of year-long plan by socialist communists and everything, something is happening where there's friction and their plans are not going as in accordance, right? And does that mean that the guy that's in there right now is going to fix everything and make it all amazing? No, I don't believe that. But I believe what is setting up is a conflict, and it will have to boil over. Something will have to come to a kinetic conclusion with what is happening between these factions that are fighting. So that's where I think we're at in this. I thought this would have happened before. I thought they would have killed Donald Trump a long time ago, or attempted to assassinate him much previously. And I know they have. There's a lot of conspiracy even behind the scenes that they have attempted multiple times, not just in Butler last year, but that during his first administration, that there were threats of assassination and things that were thwarted behind the scenes that didn't get publicly known. So it's like, I expected him to be gone a long time ago. So the fact that it keeps dragging on like this is actually encouraging to me. It's actually encouraging to think that we're going to wake up a lot more people, even if he makes a lot of people pissed off, and it's because they misunderstand what's going on. That's a benefit. I see it as a benefit. And so I'm willing to just kind of sit back and wait for everybody to see how it all shakes out before I'm start to really beat people over the head with, like, why aren't you seeing what's going on kind of thing. So I think we'll see that this very group of international financiers that this book is calling out are the very people behind all the hoaxes that Donald Trump is pointing at. The Russia hoax, the intelligence wars and covering up Benghazi and the regime change that goes on in all these different nations and things like that. Like, this needs to come out. These people need to be exposed. Everybody needs to be a cleansing by fire. And that's exactly what I think we're walking into. And we're starting to see the foreshocks of that kind of earthquake. Think of COVID. Think of all these things. I believe COVID was a biological weapon released by these same financiers, these same groups, these same people, to try and muddy and disrupt the attack on their plan. That's why we had 4 years of Biden, and I think there's a lot more behind the scenes that was going on in there. Maybe a devolvement of government, and military intelligence playing more of a role than people, talking heads and your pundits that are looking at things solely on the veneer of geopolitics as it's presented like a soap opera, on the surface level. Nobody's piercing the veil of this military fight of intelligence that goes back to Great Britain and beyond, and the very intelligence agencies that set up our FBI, that set up our CIA, that set up the Mossad, that set up all these things, right? Nobody's really looking at that and saying, this is the problem, this is the root. Everybody wants to attach to the characters they see and attack the characters because that's easy. That's really easy. It would be really easy to jump on the bandwagon and get the social credit from everybody for saying the inflammatory things that everybody wants you to say right now. It's not easy to sit up there and be like, you know what, guys, I think everybody's wrong. I think we need to look at what the real problem is. And I made a tweet about it today or yesterday. I thought getting online and meeting other Latter-day Saints online that this is what we would be. We would be the eyes through what's going on. We had prophets that pointed to this kind of stuff going on and said, we need to be the ones to be aware of it. It's in our Book of Mormon. From the dust, the prophets of God, those who saw Jesus Christ in the flesh here in the Americas, they saw our time and warned us of this kind of infiltration and secret combination overtaking of our nations. It's happening. And yet we're the most reluctant to go out there and say, hey, this is what's happening on the geopolitical scene, because we don't want to be seen as crazy, because we're already seen as crazy. We're doing so good. Everybody's starting to like us. Why do we go and, bring that kind of persecution upon us. But to me, I'm like, you know what? All the people hungry for truth right now, all the people seeking to know where the truth is and they don't know where to find it, don't you think they'd be happy to see a group of Christians stand up and say, hey, we have texts and understanding of these kinds of things that our prophets are telling us what's going on. The Book of Mormon shows us how we can fight these kinds of secret combinations. I thought I would get online and see a whole army of Latter-day Saints doing this, talking about secret combinations beyond the surface level, beyond regurgitating the stupid talking points of late night talk show hosts or political rags, right? I'm just so disappointed in the lack of critical thinking that is applied to secret combinations and prophecy in the latter days from people who are the most educated about it, or should be. And it's like cognitive dissonance. It just shuts off in their brain. We're like, nope, can't explore that. I'm just going to look at the prophet and we're only going to be nice and kind and love everybody. And that's all we have to worry about, Leland. Okay, then tell me why we read section 88 in our first research stream, where it's 100 verses plus of telling us we need to study these things out to be prepared. We need to be wise. We need to have our eyes open. How do you expect to be like Nephi and see things if you won't look? How's an angel going to come and tell you to look when you've proven throughout your life that you want to stick your head in the sand, that you don't want to see things that are happening? That's the emotion behind that post for me. And I'm not mad at anybody here or any of you. It's just, this is how I talk. This is how I get. I just have accepted that this is not what's going to happen. And again, the dichotomy is that it is not the role of the church to call out Mystery Babylon and fight her, but it is the role of individual members to be aware of the deception, to be smart to it. Like Ezra Taft Benson over and over and over and over advised and counseled us that we should know what's going on and take action locally where we can. We should defend the Constitution everywhere we can. President Oaks talked about this recently, so it's not like this is me focusing too much on President Benson of the past. I'm seeing that members today, it's not that they're focused on Ezra Taft Benson too much. They don't even admit that what he said was real. That when he pointed to what was going on in the government with the CFR and these types of things, when he said the secret combination of the Book of Mormon is here, it's in our government, there it is. And he's pointing to these things. This book we're reading is his recommendation. I'm not the crazy one. I mean, I'm crazy because I'm willing to get out here and yell in a microphone to you guys and sweat and write rap music. And I just give my talents. I'm crazy. Okay. I'm sorry. But this makes sense. This lifts me up above the doom scrolling, above the black pilling. I made a joke. I said I was outer darkness pilled because I don't see any Latter-day Saints doing this. It's like, oh gosh, it's worse than black pilled, right? Because we should be the ones to do this. I think we will. I think we are. I think we will. I think I'm impatient. I know I'm impatient. And so I love that I get to be a part of it in the little tiny insignificant role that I am into it right now. So Dustin says, why do I think he appointed Jerome Powell? Because I think it wasn't the right time to pull the rug from the central bank until some things had been established. You don't just go in and pull the rug out of everything. It would have caused a civil war in his first term. A lot of the Q drops, like I said, when I went into them, when I was going through them at the time, they talked about this openly, that all these things he wants to do, to take down the Federal Reserve, all these points we're reading about, these were pushed through back channels through the first Trump campaign. Propaganda or not. That's what was being pushed to the public from his side, was that these things are in play. These things are what we're targeting. And there's a long game with a strategy of cascading moves. It's like game theory. You can't just go in and make moves on a chessboard that your pieces can't make, even though you know where you want to get to. Even though you know where you want to put your piece, you can't just get up and move your piece there. You've got to make the moves that the game requires, that the battle space requires. There are a lot of people that explore these conspiracy things and are like, why doesn't somebody just go in there and rip it all out and fix it? It's like, you could, but at what cost? At the cost of many people dying in civil war because they're confused. They're not educated on what's changing in the government. And so they'd be easily tricked into thinking that it was an insurrection when it might be the right thing to do. And that's what I think they tried to capture him in 2020, was an insurrection, right? And then paint all of his supporters as insurrectionists so that they could disband the populist movement growing and pushing behind him, the MAGA movement, right? And I wanted to explore, I can trail that the MAGA movement is the Tea Party movement, is the John Birch Society movement, is all of these anti-communist McCarthyist movements throughout. It's the same vein being pulled. Different faces, different masks, different times. It's the same game that the communists play. And you've got to have this push and pull of these two systems. And when you have this group of naive populists come up and say, hey, yeah, things aren't right, we got to organize against these conspirators. Well, then the conspirators who have been sitting back for hundreds of years, they look at us and they say, these chumps, we need to send somebody in and infiltrate them. So they go in and they infiltrate the John Birch Society. They go in and they infiltrate, all of the Republican, the RNI, right? What is it? The CIA sets up their two wings of influence over the Republicans and the Democrats, and then push them towards socialism through the military-industrial complex and contracts with military contractors or salaries or kickbacks and things like that to go along with the socialization of all nations, the democratization of the world through military force. So I think things have to be done in order. Things have to be done, and everybody, okay, so you want to say 4D chess, that it's not happening. Yet, what are we reading about? What is this? What are we just reading about Paul Warburg, about the Fabian Socialists, about the Bavarian Illuminati? That's 4D chess. It's 4D chess. It has been going on since the inception of our nation and before it. Okay, the collapse of Rome, the takeover of Rome the takeover of Greece by Rome, and going back to Babylon. It's always been 4D chess. And it's the stupid plebs like us who think that that's not possible. It doesn't happen. That's not going on. I am flabbergasted that people think that we're at the pinnacle of society right now, 2025, according to the secular world. We watch how many movies and TV show and Hollywood has created about how powerful our intelligence capabilities are, and our military and our everything, right? And we think that that's not in play right now because you've got somebody who doesn't appear like everyone else. Yet his actions, his fruits, are right in line with this 4D chess of secret combinations fighting each other. It absolutely is. And if you're unwilling to look at the depths of the layers, well, then it's easy to just back out and dismiss and run away and say, no, it's just stupid. But this is the scriptures. If you ever read the Old Testament, read it the first time, you're like, wow, I don't understand any of that crap. Oh my gosh, I don't ever want to read that again. It was so boring. But the more you get in, the more layers you dig in, the more you see the picture, the more you're aware of the room, the more you become familiar with it, the more time you want to spend in it, the more time you want to see it, the more time and benefit you get out of studying it. But if you just abandon the search, the endeavor, the perspective, before you start to see what it grants you, what was the point of trying? That's how I see all of this. I think it is all connected. So, taking advantage of Congress's desire to adjourn for Christmas, so they passed it in the late night. Where did I leave off? I was over here. So, the Federal Reserve Act was and still is hailed as a victory of democracy over the money trust. Nothing could be further from the truth. The whole central bank concept was engineered by the very group it was supposed to strip of power. The myth that the money trust had been defrocked should have been explored when Paul Warburg was appointed to the first Federal Reserve Board, a board which was handpicked by Colonel House. So all the same guys that set it up were put on the board to oversee it once it was in. Paul Warburg relinquished his $500,000 a year job as a Kuhn Loeb partner to take a $12,000 a year job with the Federal Reserve. That makes sense, right? That's what normal people would do. So it's clear that he had other benefits that were paying off. The accidentalists who teach in our universities would have you believe that he did it because he was a public-spirited citizen. And the man who served as chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank during its early critical years was the same Benjamin Strong of the Morgan interests, who accompanied Warburg, Davison, Vanderlip et al. To Jekyll Island, Georgia, to draft the Aldrich Bill. How powerful is our central bank? The Federal Reserve controls our money supply and interest rates, and thereby manipulates the economy, creating inflation or deflation, recession or boom, and sending the stock market up or down at a whim. The Federal Reserve is so powerful that Congressman Wright Patman, chairman of the House Banking Committee, maintains, in the United States today, we have, in effect, two governments. We have the duly constituted government. Then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution. So neither presidents, I think that's a huge quote right there. Let me read that one more time for my sake. In the United States today, we have, in effect, two governments. We have the duly constituted government. This is what everybody today, all your normies, are going to think that's the only thing. They don't believe in a deep state. They're starting to. They're starting to see like, oh yeah, and it's becoming colloquial language now. But do you see how the saturation had to take a decade of hitting people with fake news, with this, with that, with this, that? It had to be counter psychological operations to bring the people to a threshold in which when things start to flip, when the chess moves at the end start to take, and you're taking critical pieces, that you don't have mutiny amongst your own, that you don't have confusion amongst your people. When you read John Birch handouts or Ezra Taft Benson, when he would point you to things, even at the end of this book, what do they tell you to do? They tell you to get educated about what's going on, about this. That's the main defense, is if people could be educated, if you would see what's going on, if you knew what your freedoms were, if you knew what your rights were, if you knew what the Constitution was, and you could see clearly who the enemies of it are, we would be capable as a people and a sovereign people to shuck off these shackles of this second government, this deep state, right? So part of curing the sickness here is not just treating the illness. You've got to educate the patient, because part of the healing has to come from them. It is them. The power is the people. It's us. So every pamphlet you read from a John Birch Society, Heritage Foundation, whatever, any of these people that know about this stuff, and they're like, how do you fight it? What do we do? Are we hopeless? Are we powerless? You're not. Educate yourself. Understand what's going on so you don't get tossed to and fro with every whim of doctrine and rumor of speculation going on the surface level of geopolitics. Get out of the stupid beta. Oh, I'm gonna swear if I keep escalating like this. Stop listening to voices who are riling you up intentionally, who are whipping you into a frenzy every time you stop listening to a podcast or whoever it is, and they're just jumping from one contentious thing to another, to another, to another, to another. Like, why? Why are we doing that? Why are you allowing yourself to be pulled into that? Because then you start regurgitating, you start repeating it, you become like that. So my recommendation is find sources that are looking deeper, that aren't just regurgitating the headline news of what's going on today, but that are actually understanding or trying to speculate and consider what more could be going on right here, other than what they're presenting surface value to us. Because throughout history, as we read history books, nothing that was presented at the surface level to the public was ever true. Nothing. It's always been a subversion. It's always been a layer of masks, a drama. Neither presidents, congressmen, nor secretaries of Treasury direct the Federal Reserve in matters of money. The Federal Reserve directs them. So where did our constitutional powers go? Out the door with the Federal Reserve. Independent, unaudible, and totally corrupted. The uncontrolled power of the Fed was admitted by Secretary of the Treasury David M. Kennedy in an interview for the May 5th, 1969 issue of U.S. News and World Report. 1969, this is well after the CFR has been established, World War I, World War II, the establishment of our CIA and intelligence operations. All of these things are now thrust upon the nation. And here you have Secretary of Treasury David M. Kennedy saying this. Question: do you approve of the latest credit tightening moves? Speaking of moves by the Fed. Answer: it's not my job to approve or disapprove. It is the action of the Federal Reserve. So here he's already been conditioned as a congressman, right? Or not a congressman, as a member of the government, to abdicate his responsibilities or even to admit that he should have them. He's just like totally happy to pass off and abrogate his responsibilities or our responsibilities to an unverifiable third party. Professor Carol Quigley of Harvard, Princeton, and Georgetown Universities wrote a book disclosing an international banker's plan to control the world from behind the political and financial scenes. Quigley revealed plans of billionaires to establish dictatorship of the super rich disguised as worker democracies. So they always tell you, oh, it's for the people, it's by the people. It's like we read earlier. Why are all the richest people of these times, these robber barons, they're the ones pushing communism and socialism? Because it's not a government for the poor and for the people. It's a government for the rich to keep being rich, and for the poor to keep staying poor. That's what it does. So they disguise themselves as worker democracies. It's, oh no, we're democracies of the people. Now, J.P. Morgan created an artificial panic used as an excuse to pass the Federal Reserve. Morgan was instrumental in pushing the U.S., and this is just like a recap of his image in the book here. So it's like a caption. J.P. Morgan created a picture of J.P. Morgan here. He created the artificial panic we talked about in 1907 to pass the Federal Reserve Act. Morgan was instrumental in pursuing the U.S. or pushing U.S. into World War I to protect his loans to British government. He financed socialist groups to create an all-powerful centralized government which international bankers would control at the apex from behind the scenes. After his death, his partners helped finance the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which again, Every nation they went into and took over, that's what they've been doing. They've been toppling them, regime change, throw in a central bank, control their economy, control the government. And curiously enough, the Federal Reserve System has never been audited and has firmly resisted all attempts by House Banking Committee Chairman Wright Patman to have it audited. So that's the time of this book. How successful has the Federal Reserve System been? It depends on your point of view. Since Woodrow Wilson took his oath of office, the national debt has risen from $1 billion to $400, and we talked about that, 50 trillion now, 40 trillion. The total amount of interest paid since then to the international bankers holding the debt is staggering, with interest having become the third largest item in the Federal Reserve in the federal budget. Interest on the national debt is now $22 billion every year, and climbing steeply as inflation pushes up the interest rate on government bonds. Meanwhile, our gold is mortgaged to European central banks, and our silver has all been sold. With economic catastrophe imminent, only a blind disciple of the accidental theory of history could believe that all of this has occurred by coincidence. When the Federal Reserve System was foisted on an unsuspecting American public, there were absolute guarantees that there would be no more boom and bust economic cycles. The men who behind the scenes were pushing the central bank concept of the international bankers faithfully promised that from then on, there would be only steady growth and perpetual prosperity. However, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. accurately proclaimed, from now on, depressions will be scientifically created. Using a central bank to create alternate periods of inflation and deflation and thus whipsawing the public for vast profits. Back and forth, whipsawing. This had been worked out by the international bankers to an exact science. Having built the Federal Reserve as a tool to consolidate and control wealth, the international bankers were now ready to make a major killing. Between 1923 and 1929, which would have been the roaring 20s, the Federal Reserve inflated the money supply to 62%. Much of this new money was used to bid the stock market up to dizzying heights. So again, creating a character and a culture of speculation. At the same time, and look, is it true speculation if you have people manipulating it that know where this goes up and down? No. That's why so much money is made on Wall Street. At the same time that enormous amounts of credit money were being made available, the mass media began to ballyhoo tales of the instant riches to be made in the stock market. According to Ferdinand Lundberg, for profits to be made on these funds, the public had to be induced to speculate. And it was so induced by misleading newspaper accounts, many of them bought and paid for by the brokers that operated the pools. The House hearings on and think of like the same thing that happens today is like your crypto pump and dump schemes. Like it's like a microcosm of the same macrocosm happening, where you have these crap coins come up and they're inflated and pumped up and then dumped. Boom. And everybody holding the bag at the end is left short-sticked, while everybody who knew the timing of when to get in and get out makes a fortune. The House hearings on stabilization of the purchasing power of the dollar disclosed evidence in 1928 that the Federal Reserve Board was working closely with the heads of European central banks. Go figure. So we had, remember, the Bank of England, the Bank of Paris, the Bank of Venice. We had all these banks, and then finally we get our central bank here in New York, in America. And business as usual for these guys. The committee warned that a major crash had been planned in 1927. At a secret luncheon of the Federal Reserve Board, the heads of the European central banks, the committee warned the international bankers were tightening the noose. Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England, came to Washington on February 6, 1929, to confer with Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury. On November 11, 1927, the Wall Street Journal described Mr. Norman as the currency dictator of Europe. So Professor Carroll Quigley notes that Norman, a close confidant of J.P. Morgan, admitted, "I hold the hegemony of the world." So he holds the bag, the coins. Immediately after this mysterious visit, the Federal Reserve Board reversed its easy money policy and began raising the discount rate. The balloon, which had been inflated constantly for nearly 7 years in the 20s, was about to be exploded. On October 24th, the feathers hit the fan. Writing in the United States Unresolved Monetary and Political Problems, William Bryan describes what happened. When everything was ready, the New York financiers started calling 24-hour broker call loans. This means that the stockbrokers and the customers had to dump their stocks on the market in order to pay the loans. This naturally collapsed the stock market and brought a banking collapse all over the country because the banks not owned by the oligarchy were heavily involved in broker call claims at the same time. So this is what we're talking about with the crypto scheme pump and dump. This happened here with these banks in late 1920s. The Federal Reserve System would not come to their aid, although they were instructed under the law to maintain an elastic currency. The investing public, including most stockbrokers and bankers, took the horrendous blow in the crash, but not the insiders. They were either out of the market or had sold short so that they made enormous profits as the Dow Jones plummeted. For those who knew the score, a comment by Paul Warburg had provided the warning to sell. So he had communicated publicly to the insiders on when they should sell. That signal came on March 9th, 1920. So, question for you. If these international financiers in 1929 were signaling covertly through public communications to each other when to sell, when to buy, when to manipulate and move the markets, is it out of the question for you to think that things like that might be happening today in maybe a more obviously advanced, exponentially complicated type of situation, or scattered, fractured into a bunch of different factions doing the same thing? That's what we're up against. And so it's very confusing. So I get it. It's hard. But if you go back to the root and see the genesis of this, you start to recognize the pattern on all the micro scales around us today. For those who knew the score, they made a killing. Let's see. When Financial Chronicle quoted Warburg as giving this sound advice: if orgies of unrestricted speculation are permitted to spread too far, the ultimate collapse is certain, to bring about a general depression involving the whole country. So here's a guy with his hand on the button to do this and is like, oh my gosh, guys, if things keep happening, we might have a collapse. Sharpies were later able to buy back these stocks at a 90% discount from their former highs. So to think that the scientifically engineered crash of 29 was an accident or the result of stupidity defies all logic. The international bankers who promoted the inflationary policies and pushed the propaganda which pumped up the stock market represented too many generations of accumulated expertise to have blundered the Great Depression. Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, commented, "The Depression was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as the rulers of us all." This is what Agenda 2030 essentially is, with a new system, a reset. Think about if they pull us into a World War III and everybody gets crapped on and goes into super debt, and then who's holding control of everyone at that point? A global war. It would be these global bankers who have climbed up over the centuries to be in the position they're in. Although we have not had another depression of the magnitude of that which followed 1929, we have since, and we have, by the way, I think for sure, we have since suffered regular recession. I mean, it wasn't to the effect of like a Dust Bowl and things like that, but nearly. We have since suffered regular recessions. Each of these has followed a period in which the Federal Reserve tromped down hard on the money accelerator and then slammed on the brakes. Since 1929, the following recessions have been created by such manipulations, and there's a whole list of them. Chart 5, based on one appearing of the highly respected financial publication. Chart 5, based on one appearing in the highly respected financial publication Indicator Digest of June 24th, 1969, shows us the effects of the Dow Jones Industrial Average of Federal Reserve policies. This is a long sentence. Let me break it down again. So this chart, it shows the effects on the Dow Jones Industrial Average of Federal Reserve policies of expanding or restricting the money supply. So it's saying a chart shows how when the Federal Reserve expands or contracts it, right, like how it affects the stock market. This is how the stock market is manipulated and how depressions or recessions are scientifically created. If you have inside knowledge as to which way the Federal Reserve policy is going to go, you can make a ton of money. Another part of what's going on here I see is the offboarding of the fiat monetary system with things like Bitcoin. People are promoting that as a sovereign way to take our sovereignty back by not participating in the central banking system. Now, there's also a question of, is it the same thing? Is it created by the central bank system to be another rug pull to de-escalate people thinking they're gaining their freedom or fighting for it, only to be put back into a pit? Well, time will tell. But that's the whole crux of what's going on with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies versus a fiat dollar or going back to gold or these types of things. All that conversation is a result of these manipulations by the central bankers. The members of the Federal Reserve Board are appointed by the president for 14-year terms. Since these positions control their entire economy of the country, they are far more important than cabinet positions. But who has ever heard of any of them except possibly Chairman Arthur Burns? These appointments, which should be extensively debated by the Senate, are routinely approved. But here, as in Europe, these men are mere figureheads. I see this whole paragraph as just explaining bureaucracy, that the whole idea of infiltrating the government and just putting in your established people, like 14-year position. Like, that's a long term that can withstand several presidencies and administrations as they change. That's the idea, is you establish a fifth column that isn't voted out by people and continues to maintain your agenda through superficial changes that the public thinks are doing things. Okay. But these appointments should be blah, blah, blah. But here, as in Europe, these men are mere figureheads put in their positions at the behest of the international bankers who finance the presidential campaigns of both political parties. And Professor Quigley reveals that these international bankers who owned and controlled the banks of England and France maintained their power even after those banks were theoretically socialized. The American system is slightly different, but the net effect is the same. Ever-increasing debt requires ever-increasing interest payments, inflation, and periodic scientifically created depressions and recessions. The end result of the insiders have their way will be the dream Montague Norman of the Bank of England, that the hegemony of the world finance should reign supreme over everyone. That's what Carol Quigley said, that the group he was tied in, these bankers, that's what their goal was. Everywhere, as one whole supranational control mechanism. So here's the charts they're talking about. Federal Reserve monetary policy and how the stock market goes up. So here's the update in 1985. And I think this is the end of this chapter. So we're at the end here. Thank you. It's been 3 hours. And a lot of it was garbage at the beginning of me getting set up. So thank you for sticking around. Since 1971, we have witnessed 2 massive inflations and 3 recessions. And again, think about this. This is their update in 1985. So since 1985, since I was born, 25 years. I'm not 25. 40 years ago, basically, right? Whew, I'm getting old. How many other recessions and, inflation, how many times have they pumped and dumped us to? I mean, there's a whole lot of other complications and obstacles that have been thrown our way since then as well. But let's read this 1985 update. In every trip around the track, the rate of price inflation went to higher levels than the previous round. And during the pullback, it came to rest at a new higher ground. In other words, each new high was higher than the previous high, and each new low was higher than the previous low. The inflation of the 70s and the 80s was much worse than anything we'd experienced since the end of the Civil War. I remember, as if it were yesterday, sitting in Honolulu, listening to President Nixon on August 15th, 1971, when he announced that the US dollar would no longer be redeemable in gold, moving away from the gold standard. He also announced at the same speech that in order to curb inflation, he was invoking wage and price controls. That day spelled the ultimate death of the dollar. Today, in early 1985, the dollar is strong, but strong in relation to what? Other fiat currencies. Investors, possibly only American investors who are selling foreign currencies and investments, have rushed into the dollar only because it is strong relative to the other currencies which have been inflated, even more than the dollar itself, or because the U.S. economy is somewhat stronger than the socialist economies abroad. I will have much more to relate on this entire subject in subsequent chapters, but suffice it to say that the role of the Federal Reserve is greater today than at any time in the past. So they basically matched our bubble with all the socialist nations and banks that they had before, to pop us right along with them. When Gary and I outlined the role of the Fed and its relation to the movement of the stock market, hardly anyone paid attention. Yet now it's almost impossible to listen to the radio or watch TV and not have the commentator explain the movements of the market by its relation to the Federal Reserve policy and the impact of the interest rates. Everybody has become a rates watcher. Every time we go through one of these inflation recession cycles, invariably, the then reigning political leadership announces with great pomp about how we have broken the back of inflation. Nixon did this in 1972, Gerald Ford did it in 1976, and Reagan is doing it now. The reality is that breaking the back of inflation without the discipline of gold in the monetary system is tantamount to breaking the back of King Cobra by wrestling it to the ground. Unless you chop off the head, it's going to get you. So, pulling it back into modern times again as I'm thinking about this. Donald Trump represents gold. Like, he's literally symbolic of gold. Everybody talks about that. He got gold-plated everything, gold things. He talks about gold all the time. Before coming into office, what was one of the talking points that was brought up in propaganda? It was auditing the Fort Knox, right? Auditing our gold reserves, our gold supplies. All of this conversation, all of these parts are being brought up again in a way that for the last 25, 30 years, 40 years, probably since JFK's assassination or Reagan, these things have kind of been taboo to talk about as our government and leaders and the secret combinations controlling us have focused on the war on terror, Cold War, Russia, we got to get Russia, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're wanting you to look anywhere but at the things that have slowly come and creeped to the surface. Now anybody can see what's going on. The curtain's open, but they're still acting like, people aren't going to look. And it's true. A lot of people aren't looking. So every time we go through one of these, I reread that. Did I say that? It's going to get you. Yeah, King Cobra. Okay. As inflation engulfs the whole world, it's vitally important to recall the words and dreams of Montague Norman as quoted above. For when the dollar does finally collapse, you can bet your last Krugerrand. I don't know what that is. Let's look it up. South African gold coin with the portrait of President Kruger on the obverse. Okay. So you can bet your last Krugerrand that the insiders of world finance will be standing in the wings with a money system that will sound the death knell of all national currencies, including the dollar. What is the CBN? Central digital. What do they call it? CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies. Right. This is their next monetary system coming in to manipulate and pull. And this is why the Bitcoin, the separated independent blockchain, right, is being presented as the alternative, where you have CBDCs where they're like, no, we'll do a digital currency, but it's through the central bank, and they're still pumping in and dumping it. Whereas the Bitcoin with the blockchain ledger and supposedly a lot of transparency and things like that, like, would be a defense against that, or at least it's an idea of that. Like, that's what these ideas are: the Bitcoin conversation versus these central bank-backed digital currencies. And this is all in the conversation geopolitically, but gets washed out by the more sensational things. As these things are coming to fruition, they're coming to a head, a conflict that will need to be resolved. Something will change. Like the dollar, everybody knows the dollar is going to pop. Everybody knows the fiat currency was set up as a balloon to explode, but it's like, are we really considering what that looks like? And that it could happen, or the globalists are expecting it to happen before or around 2030, here within the next decade, in our decade. Just like we were reading about in the 1920s, where they knowingly pumped up the 20s as the roaring 20s by inflating with a plan to deflate it at a certain time. It's exactly what's going on. It's just, it's way more public and acknowledged, and they have to spend way more effort propagandizing the public to accept it than before. They could just kind of do it before by keeping it all within government and administrative and industry and things like that. Now they've got to involve the public because of social media and things like that. And so the propaganda and conversation is oversaturated with hysteria. As inflation engulfs the whole world, it's vitally important to recall the words and dreams. Oh, I just read that. I always do that. I'm sorry. I've done that like 50 times in this podcast. I'm gonna have to get better at that, marking where I stop when I go on a diatribe. How much inflation will it take to bring this about? Frankly, I don't know. But when it does happen, the world will rush to the new money as a panacea, a healing for everything, regardless of who issues it. It is my personal opinion that the source will be the World Bank or some future lookalike. And that's what everybody talking about this in the conspiracy world is saying. They're saying the IMF, an International Monetary Fund, would be like this centralized lever puller for the central banks and things like that, that they would be the one to back these CBDCs and this new currency they're talking about. So while he's mentioning this in 1985, now here we have 40 years later, a clear vision on what that thing he's saying is going to looks like. And we're looking at it right now with the CBDCs and things like that. Writing in the fall, 1984 edition of Foreign Affairs, which is a intelligence magazine, by the way. So if you wanted to know, like, oh, what magazines are Foreign Affairs is the CFR, foreign policy propaganda rag. The official, here it is, the official quarterly of the Council on Foreign Relations. Richard N. Cooper outlined his views on this subject in an article entitled "A Monetary System for the Future." Professor Cooper recommended the creation of a common currency for all of the industrial democracies, with a common monetary policy and a joint bank of issue to determine that monetary policy. Later on, he went on to point out, but a single currency is possible only if there is, in effect, a single monetary policy. That's what the IMF is trying to do. And a single authority issuing the currency and directing the monetary policy. Get this, this is what COVID was an exercise in control and monitoring and seeing, like testing the waters of their control system on the public to say, do we have enough power with our centralized, the World Health Organization? And remember, going back to these pillars of subversion, they've got now these centralized organizations for each one, right? So if we're talking about finance and bank, it's the IMF. We're talking about health, it's the World Health Organization. We're talking about media and propaganda, there's one for that. We're talking about military and defense, it's their NATO armies that they're wanting to have now and try and create. Like every one of these things has a globalist outpost or a shell that they're filling with to try and take over control from all of the sovereign nations and say, nope, take your freedom and sovereignty because you guys don't know how to handle yourself and dump that all into our international organizations. That's what this is. That's exactly what they're talking about here. So they need a single currency as possible, in effect, a single monetary policy controlling that currency and a single authority issuing the currency. So again, a central bank that can make the money or make the usury, create the magic money out of thin air, and inflate or deflate it by adjusting the interest rate. They need a single control point of that. So how can independent states accomplish that? They need to turn over the determination of monetary policy to a supranational body, a body that is bigger. And lest you think that these are the musings of some no-name ivory tower academic, let me hasten to point out that Professor Cooper is the Emeritus C. Boas Professor of International Economics at Harvard, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs during 1977 to 1981, and Provost of Yale University in 1972 to 1974. He also understands perfectly how these things are done, as evidenced by one of his closing statements in the article. In short, there would be an inner club accepting higher responsibilities. Yes, indeed, inner club it would be. For as Bill Moyers made clear in his TV program cited above, the world of power operates behind closed doors. And there's that famous comedian line where he's like, it's a big club and you ain't in it, right? He said that in the 90s. So that would have been after all this. And he's basically quoting Quigley, who's this very prestigious academic professor of economics who wrote a book and was allowed to look at the banking, allowed to look at the books of this Fed, of this supranational entity that has been growing and is established with old blood money. This is the Mystery Babylon, right? These are the money changers behind the scenes. So there we go. There's our chapter on the money makers or the money manipulators. It's both. So the next chapter is the Bolshevik Revolution, which is important, but I wanted to go back to like the title page of this so we can just kind of get a scan of what's coming up. I think here it is. Okay. So we went over in chapter 1, don't confuse me with facts, kind of the basic of conspiracy and understanding the conspiratorial view of history versus the coincidental view of history, where everybody just accepts, oh, things just happen by accident, and it couldn't be possible that you'd have this vast conspiracy that would take so much work and blah blah. And it's like, I can't even anymore with people like that. I don't have the patience at the moment, so I just kind of stop talking about stuff like this. If somebody is of that disposition, like until you read some books about history, we can have a conversation. So then our chapter 2 is on socialism, talk about Karl Marx and them, and now we talk about the money manipulators. So that's pretty good for today. So we've talked about government and political systems with communism and socialism and the Fabian creep. Now we've talked about banking and finance with the institution of the Federal Reserve here in America, which essentially militarized us to do the dirty work of empire. And for the last 100 years, we have been that. We have been the military arm and the industrial and financial pillage of the military-industrial complex, or the deep state, or the oligarchy, or the secret combination, or whatever name you want to put it, the blob, anything, right? So now we'll go into the Bolshevik Revolution. So we're going to tap more on some government, political systems with the next chapter and see. I actually think this is going to play a big part in what we see happening today with the Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Iran, and that situation. I think that's one and the same. Israel and Iran and Russia, Ukraine, this is all going to merge into the same conflict because it's the same people fundamentally behind the scenes, as we talked about, these money manipulators, the ones causing the problems. This is why you have Putin when he's asked, why are you doing this? Why did you attack Ukraine? Why did you do this? And he basically goes on a history lesson when he talks to anybody. He's like, well, here's the history of how this is going. And he's saying, I'm denazifying Ukraine. Do you remember what we talked about before, after World War II? What did these money manipulators do with their stooges of the socialist Nazi party, right? After Hitler was taken out and that rebellion was quashed, when they tried to shuck off the shackles of the international banking cartel, he was squashed. Hitler and the Nazis were squashed. Germany was squashed and basically placed at the bottom of the pile. And that's why they've taken the brunt and the worst of a lot of the immigration tactics of this same group in destabilization, nation destabilization. That's a whole other topic of discussion of what, after the war, what do you do with all these displaced people? Well, it's a benefit if you can use them to continue your plans. And how? In destabilizing the societies that you ship them into. You ship these immigrants that you've displaced. You displace them, then you ship them into these nations. And if you've been able to subvert the social policy in the nations you're pushing the immigrants to, well, then you can cause division from within and destabilize the very populace that could prevent you from taking over and exercising more kinetic or power projection. So a lot of this is happening right now, and I don't see a whole lot of people responsibly integrating a lot of what's going on to this big picture, to this big slow creep of a conspiratorial history. There's not a lot of people talking about this. Everybody wants to be reactionary and this, that, and blah, blah. And they have their characters and their people and their it's like WWE. You want to root for a heel or a hero, right? The villain or the hero. Like you know it's all fake, yet you still get emotional and participate in it. That's what I see so many people doing today. And it's like, you know better. You know better that there's a lot more going on under the surface, but to admit that makes you one of the crazy people, one of the conspiracy theorists, right? One of the outcasts to the social order. So there's a cost. There's a price to pay to really incorporate and internalize and learn these types of things. Because once you start to do, there's no way you start talking to other people and it doesn't spill out onto them and could damage your social status in your communities. You know, you just have to decide what's more important to you. And that's where I doom pill. That's where I outer darkness pill with the Latter-day Saints in that it seems like everybody that wants to gain a following on social media or whatever is doing it for money. They're playing right into this money manipulation pattern without taking interest in using the ability to communicate across the world, to fight, to educate people, to point out the secret combination. And I believe the scriptures that tell us that this is our job, to wear out our lives exposing this very thing, right? Is that in this section? I would think. Oh, might be another one. I guess I could just pull it up. That'd be easier to find the scripture. Maybe somebody knows it. But either way. Okay, so we've come to kind of a conclusion. I didn't add a lot to the board other than these books today. I think what I'll do in my downtime before my next stream or whatever is I'm going to add a whole bunch of this section we just read, like points on the map for the money manipulators. So I'm going to go through these names, the Paul Warburgs, Nelson Aldrich, a lot of the Jekyll Island people, maybe make a little spot for Jekyll Island. I might have to re-listen to Jekyll Island again on Audible in the next month or two as my book of choice or whatever to kind of get refreshed in this. But this is what I do when I study. This is what you should be doing when you study. This is what everyone should be doing when they're looking into things and learning and being productive, being a citizen, being someone who is aware of our awful situation and willing to testify and warn the people. And it becometh every man who hath been warned to warn his neighbor. Therefore they are left without excuse, and their sins are upon their own heads. But he that seeketh me early shall find me and not be forsaken. And I feel like too many are waiting until the last minute to say like, okay, now I'll take this stuff seriously. And then they're the ones that get the most emotional upset when they don't understand things. And it's like, you need to slow your roll because you're like a baby coming in here thinking you can push around very experienced people with your ideas and on what's going on. So it's a weird dynamic. I'm sure a lot of you who are on X or Twitter, you see this as well, where somebody new gets on Twitter and they go through like cycles of awakening of like, oh, this is how Twitter works. Oh, there's a whole lot of nasty bots in my DMs and I got to ignore them. I can't click on any of those links and they're not real people. Like you have to learn all these things for yourself. But in the moment when you first see them, you're like, oh, I'm popular. Look, somebody's reaching out to me in a DM. Or, hey, look, this is that. And you're like, oh, wait, these are all bots. Oh, wait, this is the trick. Oh, wait. And so you start to, the facade of what it appeared to be when you first came online begins to fall away and you start to see the factions. You start to see the cliques, the groups, it's the same. And I'm saying that in your enlightenment about conspiracy, in your seeking to understand the perplexities of the nations as we're commanded to do in Section 88, that this should be taken into account. That we got to learn line by line, piece by piece, and here a little, there a little. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of reading. It takes a lot of time, dedication. You've got to set aside time to do it. One of the strangleholds, the nooses that the secret combination has on us today is to keep us consuming, to keep us busy all the time. We always feel like we've got to be doing something. It's got to be this or that, or if I don't have the money, or I'm not keeping up with the Joneses, or I don't have this or that or that. And all the while, you could have been learning about these things. I think it's more fun to learn about these things. Now I'm just kind of freaking out about it. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm getting tired, so we'll probably end it here. I love you guys. Thank you so much. We should be learning more. I will try to do more of these, and we'll continue through this. I'm going to do these until they're finished. So if it takes me 6 months to get an episode out each time, that's what I'm going to do, because I'm determined to just keep at it. So here's a forward look. I've got a bunch of essays on my Cosmism Manifesto that are partially completed. They're ready to be, I want to restructure a bunch, and that's what I'm fighting myself. Like, I'll write something, I'll read it, and then I'll hate it. And I'll hate it for 2 months that I don't look at it. I don't even want to touch it. I'm not even want to open my laptop to look at it, because I know I'm going to have to like redo it all. That I have several sections in my essays like that right now that are stopping me from like just finishing it and getting it done. And I don't want to rush it just to get it done or do it. So that's why there's been a time gap between releases. But it's going to be good. So look forward to those. I think those will be the next things I focus on, is getting out 2 of my Eternal Perspectives Cosmism Manifesto essays. It'll be 17, which will be the life of Jesus and his ministry and through the Acts of the Apostles. I'm not going to do Revelation of John. That'll be a totally separate episode to have to break that down, and might be an ancillary thing. I might finish my manifesto without ever having gone into John's Revelation with the cosmic lens, which is fine. You guys can all do that yourself. And throughout the manifesto, if you've been following it, we've already done most of the book of Revelation in different pieces and things in other parts of the essay. But I just know as I start to get into that, it's going to be just as long as these other essays that I have, which are like 10,000 plus words each. So there's that. There's, I also divided up this scrub of the life of Jesus and his ministry in relation to, plasma physics and things like this, and light. And I realized that the life of Jesus Christ himself, like Jesus himself, is the white stone, like the epitome of it. He's the model of it. He is everything that I have in my white stone thesis. He embodied in his ministry, in his parables, in what he taught, and what he did in his life, in his resurrection, and in his promised second coming, and what he will do when he returns. It's all white stone related. So I have a whole essay on Jesus Christ as the white stone, which is like part 2 of the white stone thesis. Again, more scrub and evidence to say, like, I'm very confident the more I look into these things that I'm trying to share, that they are testimony enhancing, that they are in harmony with what the current prophets are teaching us today, that our focus should be on the temple, that if we have an eternal perspective, if we're thinking celestial, that is our greatest defense against the darkness, the confusion, and the hatred being promulgated and pushed upon us by these divisive secret combinations and those who seek to destroy our agency and our happiness and our freedom. So I'm very excited for the future. I am grateful that things haven't gone to pot and that I can still talk to you guys on the internet now, today in 2025. I think 5 years ago, I didn't think this would be possible. And so this is a pleasant surprise, because the more I've dug into these things, secret conspiracy and stuff like that, there's the urge to want to just kill it all with fire, to just burn it now, to pull the plug, to Lord, end it. And I think of the scripture of the destroying angels waiting to reap down the earth and being having to be held back by Heavenly Father, to be like, no, not yet, not yet. And even the angels want to come down and just devastate the wicked. I feel that. And I think everybody goes through that phase when you pierce the veil of awakening, of conspiracy, of conspiratorial history, and not just coincidence history. You get angry and you want things to be done now. You want things to be taken care of now. I want them to. I fall in that same camp. But again, as time plays out and as I become wiser and more experienced and more patient, I see every day that goes without World War III on our doorstep as a blessing and a benefit to those who need more time, those who need more love, those who need more service, who need to be ministered to by us, who need to be warned by us. My patriarchal blessing says that I would be part of a leading group of saints who would become influencers of the world, leaders, rulers, kings, magistrates, and that I would play a role in moving forward every mission of the church, in motivating missionaries, in perfecting the saints, and in performing temple work for the dead. That I would have a critical role or a major role that I would like, it says literally, I will be up to my neck in serving the Lord in these capacities over the next 40 years. And I got that when I was 15. And now here I am 40. And there's only a decade left of that promise kind of thing. So it's, for me, this is real. This is so real. And that's why it comes across, I think that's why I come across on social media and things as being too serious to people. But it's because of my white hair. It's because of what I've seen. It's because of my experience. It's because I'm so tired of fakery at church. There's so many superficial saints who just want to chalk it up and talk about sports or this or that, when it's like, do you realize what we have with the scriptures? Do you realize what the restoration provided for us? Do we realize what's in the temple? Like, not even to get into my cosmic stuff. Like, I am so full of gratitude for the Lord, for the gospel, for the restoration, for Joseph Smith, and for President Nelson today. He has lit a fire under me because I see every move that he's making as preparing and initiating us into higher orders of understanding of the gospel, a higher law, as he even calls it. And that's what's needed as the world plunges further into darkness of apostasy, to the very conflict of Armageddon. And that our covenants, our endowment, our ability to be in the temple and be worthy of it and to approach the Lord with confidence is our fire insurance. It's our blood of the Passover lamb on the doorpost to prevent the destroying angel from taking our household. And I believe that's what President Nelson is the language and the imagery that should be evoked when it is for me, when he's talking about that only the man who takes his priesthood seriously and studies these things out and seeks for the power of God is going to be able to provide that for his family during this famine, this upcoming calamity, right? This upcoming event. Joseph Smith was sent before the fire, before a catastrophe. But before the planets and the world is tossed, into supernatural, seemingly, experiences, there will be fire and war and moves by people. So there will be a end time push for an Armageddon caused by people before there's an elemental, a natural end time caused by the Lord. So I'm fully expecting that these geopolitical gas tanks that have been lit, the fuses on them are going to explode, that all nations will collapse as foretold by prophecy, but that the kingdom of God will stand and grow and go forth boldly and nobly, and no unhallowed hand will stop the work from going forth. What hand can stop the Missouri River from its decreed course or cause it to go backwards, right? That's one of the phrases. I'm butchering it. But even that, to me, is catastrophic language, because in reported catastrophes of planetary catastrophe in ancient times, rivers were reported to reverse their course. So the idea is that God can do that. God can turn the river backwards with a physical catastrophe, as witnessed in the Book of Mormon and in the Old Testament. Man can't do that. Man will try, and man will destroy himself and others. But God ultimately will destroy the wicked. And it's going to be a wonderful time for those of us who keep and make covenants with God. So thanks for being with me tonight. It's a cool Thursday. I'm not sure even what time it is. It's 10 o'clock. Time goes by fast when you're in the flow. So thank you. I was a little stumbling on my words today. I'm not sure. I'm a little tired today, but thank you guys. We'll go ahead and outro out. I'll get you some music. Let's find one second here. I'll catch you guys on Twitter. I'll try to do one of these again next week, if possible. And you can hear all those dong, dong, dong. One more. There it is. Okay. All right, y'all. Love you. Peace out.